2 days away from mandatory vaccine passports in Alberta, and you can see what it's done. It has raised the ire of this province.
We are going to do another nation-to-nation convoy. I promised Andrew Scheer, I promised Pierre Poilievre, I promised Maxime Bernier, and I definitely sent the message to Trudeau the last time we were there. I said the next time I have to come back here with a convoy, it's going to be a nationwide convoy. Hi! I'm Santa!
I had to actually change the sky lights to get in here.
Did you really? We're on live right now, Edmonton Freedom Central, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today at the National Citizens Inquiry. Selena Taylor reporting live from Red Deer, Alberta. Thank you so much. And if you like the content I'm bringing to you, donate at selenataylor.com. I appreciate you all.
Canada is clearly run by a corrupt group of people, and that we are holding political prisoners, because so many people still don't know that. So we're creating awareness about that. Thank you all for being here. Yes.
We're taking our country back.
Yeah.
Druthers is Canada's largest, most loved, independent, people-powered newspaper. Now with over 8.5 million copies printed and distributed coast to coast by concerned Canadians like you. Please, donate, subscribe, volunteer, get involved. Together we can save this country. If you stand for freedom, go to www.druthers.net.
This country is a country of openness, of respect, of compassion, of the rule of law, of the rights of the individuals, of freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from crime, freedom to love who you want and not be judged for it, freedom to do what you want with your body.
Making the mRNA is really easy and really cheap, and that's the magic of this thing. But there's no doubt in the next 5 years, we can, we just need to mess around. There's a lot of lipid nanoparticles, and some are very self-assembly, and some are very self-assembly. And there's no inherent reason it's not thermostable, it's not cheap, and it's not scalable. And so as over the 5 years, we fix that part of it, mature it, which is very typical, we'll be able to build factories worldwide that can make $2 vaccines with even less lead time than we've had to have here during this pandemic. Less lead time than we've had to have here during this pandemic. And we'll use those, as you suggest. For every disease that we don't have vaccines, we will try mRNA. In fact, for HIV, we have multiple ways. One that's more of a B cell approach, one that's more of a T cell approach. For malaria, we have multiple ideas. For TB, we have multiple ideas. And so to fill in the missing vaccines, we'll make a lot of our bets. We'll make a lot of our bets of the Gates Foundation and others who care about global health will be mRNA focused. We just need to mess around. We just need to mess around. We just need to mess around.
Welcome, folks. We've got a panel episode inbound regarding the Alberta Bill of Rights, which really garnered a lot of attention here in the last couple of years in respect to how Charter Section 1 limitations on our rights did not seem to protect us from things like coerced vaccination. It led to the disenfranchisement of many people for many, many different reasons. And so we're here tonight to talk about the Alberta Bill of Rights, and specifically what has been introduced by Danielle Smith. There is a video that has been compiled that features a fellow named Dave Freedom, and he literally legally changed his last name so that his court interactions would be R versus Freedom. This is the video compiled by Mr. Dave. I've added something to it, and it's just going to set the tone for the conversation.
The province of Alberta is on the precipice of losing 52 years of established rights and freedoms, and most have no clue. As some of you may have heard, there is a proposal to add reasonable limits to the Alberta Bill of Rights. On the surface, it may sound innocent enough. The problem, though, is that reasonable is a very vague word. What seems reasonable to one person might be unreasonable to another. The proposed amendment itself is being referred to by many lawyers as a Trojan horse.
In a few weeks' time, our UCP government will be introducing legislation to amend and strengthen the Alberta Bill of Rights, a document that has stood as a safeguard for our civil liberties and freedoms for decades.
For quick context, the Alberta Bill of Rights was created in 1972 to protect core rights that we all rely on: freedom of speech, assembly, the right to own property, etc. This document is meant to serve as a shield, ensuring the government cannot encroach on these rights and freedoms. A modified Alberta Bill of Rights could lead to limits on freedom of speech if a message is seen as unreasonable. It could also limit freedom of assembly if a peaceful protest is deemed too disruptive. Or what about public interest, national security, climate change, or the next thing they have planned for us? The truth is, once the language allows for reasonable limits, it gives the government broad discretion over when and how it applies those limits. The proposed changes are very well crafted, quite genius actually. On one hand, it appeals to a logical thinking Canadian with proposals like, quote, the right for an individual with capacity not to be compelled or coerced into receiving a vaccine. I mean, hey, who doesn't want that, right? However, the added fine print of reasonable limits makes the entire document worthless. As the saying goes, giveth with one hand and taketh away with the other. The Alberta Bill of Rights is a foundational document. It shouldn't be left vulnerable to subjective interpretations or shifting political interests. What makes it so special is that it shines in stark contrast to the Charter of Rights, which does include the words reasonable limits, by the way, a script repeated quite often during the 2020 and 2021 lockdowns.
Why are you guys doing this, man? Seriously, you guys don't care about the Charter?
The Charter has limitations.
Yep, Article 52.
The Charter has limitations.
If we want to maintain our rights, it's essential to keep them free from subjective limits that could shift based on political tides. Whether you live in Alberta or not, let's stand for an Alberta Bill of Rights that truly protects Albertans without compromise. The intentions behind this video is not to attack or advocate for any individual or political party, but rather bring this topic to the front of people's minds. Public awareness is our greatest weapon, which is why this video is necessary. Freedom dies in the dark.
Significant updates to the Alberta Bill of Rights since it was introduced. That was back in 1972. Several proposed changes were informed by recommendations in the final report from the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel. Many of those changes would align the Alberta Bill of Rights with the approach to fundamental rights in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
As Dave Freedom points out in this video, reasonable limits are a problem, but there are other key changes. It is being sold on the basis of increasing rights for firearms, freedom of expression, and expanding property rights. However, when you look at medical procedures, it starts with add the right of the individual with capacity not to be compelled or coerced into a vaccine. Capacity is a mental health term, and they could rule you without capacity simply by a visit from a state-sponsored mental health professional. Now, in the cases of individuals with capacity not to be subjected to or coerced into receiving medical care, there is a condition that unless the individual is likely to cause substantial harm to themselves or others. When we review what happened during C-19, it turns out that C-19 was not particularly a threat, and the big threat was the coerced medical experiment.
This is a government that has not faced accountability on these items. The National Citizens Inquiry has delved into this in detail. All Albertans should be intensely cautious of Bill 24, the act to amend the Alberta Bill of Rights. We all need to come together and put this to a stop.
Right. So that's my take on this whole thing. And basically, for the public's benefit, I've assembled a panel of people that I think are going to lead us to a great conversation on this topic. What we're going to do is listen to a quick clip from the Shadow Davis show of just a few days ago, and a couple of comments made by Catherine Kowalczyk.
Dave Freedom actually released a video today we'll play for you right now regarding the dangers of what Danielle Smith is trying to do. And if you'll recall, when I was reading this and playing the video of Danielle the other night, I didn't know exactly what was wrong with this, but I smelled something was up. Remember? Check out this video.
Province of Alberta.
The first thing I want to ask you, does Dave Freedom have a point with everything he said in that video? Do these amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights actually make things worse?
Yes, he raises very good points. And not only does he raise the this idea of what is reasonable, what Danielle Smith or what the Smith government has done with the existing Bill of Rights and with these amendments is added a clause that mirrors Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allows the government to limit your rights.
Okay, I'm just, if you're getting dizzy because I'm shuffling you around the screen, I'm trying to order things. So that's what Catherine Kowalczyk had to say. This is Marilyn Burns. Welcome to the panel, Marilyn. Marilyn represented the Coots 2 out of the Coots 4, and she's got some opinions on this thing. And we've also got Danielle Smith's statement. So I'm just going to keep that ready at hand. And Marilyn, would you like to say what you think about this whole thing?
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate you allowing me to have this opportunity. I would say that I am here with some sadness. I have been asked to comment on other venues and I've refused to do it. But I did want to speak with your group and with your listeners and you, because I think that you are on to something important. I'd want to clarify also that not only am I a lawyer, I'm very busy professionally in corporate matters, and I'm also one of the 2 co-founders of the very first Wild Rose Party, in which Danielle Smith was the leader and then crossed the floor. I'm currently the leader of the Advantage Party. So I've known Danielle for 18 years. And what I've seen of Danielle since she's become premier is significant concern to me. I've not been wanting to be critical of her because she does do some good things, such as letting the AIMCO group go. I think that's probably a positive move. But she does obfuscate. She deceives and she doesn't tell the whole truth. Mm-hmm. And I'm very sad to say that this time I think she's lying, and she's lying bad. So not only am I agreeing with Catherine Kowalczyk, I want to take it a step further because I do tend to be rather frank in my life. Now, I'm going to refer to the case of R versus Ingram that was filed July 31st, 2023 in the Court of Queen's Bench of Alberta. This was Justice Germain, correct? And Romain, sorry. And she raised some interesting points. She referred to the Alberta Bill of Rights and determined that Section 1 of the Charter basically overrode the Bill of Rights. That's it in a nutshell. She indicated, which is accurate, the Bill of Rights, Alberta's Bill of Rights, was first enacted in 1972. The Charter came in 1982. And in her view, the Provincial Bill of Rights lost much of its importance since the Charter. And she proceeded to explain why. And so when you folks, for example, Phil, are very concerned about Alberta losing the strength in the Alberta Bill of Rights, I'm gonna actually not agree with that completely. But what Justice Romain said was that there was an implicit internal limit to the rights protected by the Alberta Bill of Rights because it was in many ways a duplication of the Charter analysis. And all Bill of Rights have internal limits. So she just read into a limit that didn't exist there. And I think what we are in Alberta are really concerned about when we get into the guts of it is that we don't think this way. We in Alberta are different, which is why we've been the leaders in Canada for the standing up to Justin Trudeau's debauchery. But we want to have freedoms that are God-given. And we cannot refute our God-given rights. And we don't accept this limitation put on by our federal government, which is what's occurring. So what this case of Ingram said is there must be an implied limitation, and that's what Ms. Smith has done. She's putting into place what came out through the Ingram case. She's trying to put it into the Bill of Rights, but what really I find offensive is she's lying to the people and saying it strengthens our Bill of Rights. What little rights we had left in our Alberta Bill of Rights once the Canadian Charter of Rights came to be, she's now deleting everything about it. And I agree with the folks that spoke in the preamble to this discussion that we need to hang on to whatever we have. My concern is that what Danielle Smith is doing is simply acquiescing. She claims she's going to stand up to Ottawa in her words, but she never does practically. In speaking with Catherine Kowalczyk a couple of weeks ago, she made the same comment as I did and referred to the Do Nothing Sovereignty Act. So Danielle's gotten better at her rhetoric. Unfortunately, it's to the detriment of Albertans. Now, I know that Danielle has lost hundreds of her most intelligent supporters in the last few months, but she still has been very successful at deceiving many of her supporters who truly believe that she is looking out for the best interests of Alberta's freedoms.
Before we completely trash Danielle Smith, I mean, I'm definitely going to agree with you, Marilyn, that there are some very concerning signs that we're seeing, such as the approval of the C-19 vaccination for 6-month-old babies, given what we know about their harms. And now, would you guys be open to listening to Danielle Smith's speech from Tuesday, October 29th at 2:49 p.m.? If we bring that up, let's just hear what she has to say, and then I'd like to open up the conversation to starting with Chris Weisdorf, because he's got some very technical things to say that I think may resonate with what Marilyn is saying. So let's hear from Danielle.
Government bills and orders for second reading. Bill 24, Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. Honourable Mr. Amory.
Honourable members, before the Assembly is Bill 24 at second reading. Is there anyone wishing to join in the debate? The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to move second reading of Bill 24, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024, a piece of legislation that will affirm and reaffirm the values that make Alberta one of the freest jurisdictions on the planet. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to standing up for the rights of Albertans, and this legislation is one more way that we're doing that. It is imperative that government recognize the rights of individuals are paramount, and that government must respect those rights. I should probably give a little bit of my framework and history for understanding where we're coming from when I look at the issue of rights. John Locke was a philosopher from 1632 to 1704, and he was the father of our modern liberal democracy. He believed that all people were born with three natural rights, inalienable rights that were inherent within each individual. The right to life was the first. Number two is the right to liberty, as long as exercising one's liberty did not conflict with the liberty of others. The idea that your right to swing your fist stops where someone else's nose begins. And three, property, the right to own what they create or gain through trade or gift, as long as it doesn't impact another's life or liberty. This was really the foundation of modern liberalism. We have rights that are independent of particular laws. They exist regardless of what the laws are. It's not that the laws grant the rights, it's that the laws codify the rights that already exist. We are naturally, just by the endowment from the Creator, we are naturally free and equal. We have a social contract, though. This is the other part of Locke's understanding, where we agree to give up some part of our liberty, some part of our rights in exchange for the protection of those said rights and the protection of the public good. But he also pointed out that rulers who fail to protect those rights may be removed and replaced. That's the very foundation of democracy. It's why we have elections every few years, so that the people can render their judgment on how we do in protecting these foundational freedoms. So, Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Bill of Rights was first introduced in 1972. It was a full decade before the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it was introduced on the heels of the 1960 Diefenbaker Bill of Rights. But since that time, despite society evolving, the Bill of Rights hasn't changed that much. And if the Bill of Rights doesn't reflect the lessons learned and the changes needed today, then it loses its power. And Albertans are at risk of having their rights overlooked and overruled. We think this is unacceptable, and that's why I'm so pleased that the Minister of Justice has tabled amendments that will protect Albertans' personal autonomy, their property, and their expression. Mr. Speaker, these amendments stem from recommendations, in part, from the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel that we created to review the legislation and governance practices of government during the COVID-19 pandemic. And these amendments relate to those recommendations to better protect Albertans' rights and to better align the Act with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and with natural law. And I mention this because the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has an important section, Section 26. And what it says is the guarantee in this Charter of certain rights and freedoms shall not be construed as denying the existence of any other rights or freedoms that exist in Canada. It allows for the fact that it might not be a complete list. And unfortunately, from time to time, the courts have acted as if certain rights don't exist as a result of them not being enumerated. So we're going to fix that, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the Act, one of the first things that we're changing is the preamble. And I want to read this into the record so you understand the framework that we're coming from in doing this exercise on this side. Whereas the free and democratic society existing in Alberta is founded on principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God and the rule of law, and on principles fostered by tradition that honor and respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the position of the family in a society of free people and free institutions. And whereas human rights and fundamental freedoms are of foundational importance to Alberta society, including during times of emergency. There's two things that are underscored in this, Mr. Speaker. One is that these are rights endowed to each of us by virtue of being human. They are not rights that are granted by legislature. They are granted by virtue of being human. They are inalienable. And it also, they don't get suspended in times of emergency. Rights being inalienable exist at all times. So, Mr. Speaker, there are a few areas that we found in recent years that governments haven't necessarily respected this overarching edict. And the first, I would say, is in the area of property rights. The Speaker may know that I began as a property rights advocate all the way back in 1997 as the founding director of the Canadian Property Rights Research Institute. And one of the things I learned at that time, studying Locke and others, was that there was an omission in our Bill of Rights. They currently include the right of individuals to the enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived of this enjoyment except by due process of the law. But one thing that was missing is that the taking of property should also come with just compensation. If the public is going to benefit from taking private property, the public should pay for it. If you take something that is not yours without paying for it, it is theft. And this government will not stand for that to occur. So what we are going to change in the Bill of Rights is that the law of Alberta means an act that is enacted before or after the commencement of this act. Any order, rule, or regulation made under it is subject to be repealed, abolished, or altered by the legislature. But importantly, the taking of property means in respect of real or personal property. Real property is real estate, personal property is movable property, and I'll say more about firearms in a moment. But a transfer of ownership of property without the consent of the owner, that is called a taking. And number two, an owner of property being deprived of all reasonable uses of that property. That will also be deemed to be a taking of property, which then has to be subject to fair compensation. The amendments will make Alberta a leader in the area of property rights. I can continue on because one of the things that we are going to modify under Section 4 is that currently it states that liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property are protected. We're going to change that to liberty and security of the person, but make it even more clear how important we believe protecting property rights are by adding the right to the enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived thereof, except to the extent authorized by law and except by due process of law. And importantly, number A, sub 2, the right not to be subject to a taking of property except to the extent authorized by law and where just compensation is provided. We think that this is going to recalibrate the relationship between provincial governments and all those who get the power through provincial legislation to ensure that every action that they take is done through a lens of ensuring that they respect the property rights of those that they govern. The other area where we think is vitally important for us to regulate on is the right of an individual with capacity not to be subjected to or coerced into receiving medical care, medical treatment, or a medical procedure without consent. Now, there's two parts to this issue, Mr. Speaker, and I'll explain why it is that it's separated into two. So under the amendments that you'll see, sub H, the right of the individual with capacity not to be subjected to or coerced into receiving medical care, medical treatment, or a medical procedure without the consent of that individual, unless that individual is likely to cause substantial harm to that individual or to others. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we have a very serious addiction crisis in this province, and we've already indicated that we are going to begin consultation on compassionate intervention, which would be taking a person who is causing harm to themselves or others and incapable of making decisions in their own best interest and ordering them into treatment so that we can restore their individual agency so we can get them on with their lives. So this language that we're using is specifically to allow for the fact that watching somebody slowly kill themselves is not something that we will do in a free and democratic society. We're going to make sure that those folks get treatment. However, notwithstanding that, we believe that the right to the individual with capacity should not be subjected to or coerced into receiving a vaccine without the consent of that individual. We felt it was really important to identify that particularly, Mr. Speaker, because I think that what we observed in recent years is that was not a provision that was honored by the provincial government. And we heard about it from our citizens, and they wanted us to correct that. And so we are correcting that in law, that a person will always have the right to be able to say yes or no to getting a vaccine. Remember, vaccines will be and will remain an individual choice. You take a vaccine to protect yourself. That's why we want to make sure that every person is able to talk to their doctor, talk to their medical professional, and be able to get the advice that makes the most sense for them. But you cannot coerce others to take any medical procedure that they do not wish to take. We have to remember, why is this necessary? Well, back in the day, the NDP were proposing going door to door with teams of health professionals to coerce people into getting jabs at the door at a cost, I think they estimated at the time, of $45 million. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, this government will never do that. And this is our guarantee that this is why we're bringing forward.
I do have to stop her there. I'm going to bring in Chris Weisdorf to talk about this further, but I do have to point out, as per that video at the opening of the show here, let me bring up the wording. So this is the Alberta government website, Protecting Albertans' Rights. And if I scroll down to key changes and make this as big as possible for our home viewing audience, there's two statements there, and she just gave her spin on it. It says, add the right of an individual with capacity not to be subjected to or coerced into receiving medical care, treatment, or procedure without consent, unless that individual is likely to cause substantial harm to themselves. This is for somebody with capacity, not without. The next statement is, add the right of the individual with capacity not to be compelled or coerced into receiving a vaccine. Oh. I just, yeah. I swear this statement has changed. Maybe I read this particular statement wrong when I made that opening video. But because was there not a statement about somebody receiving a vaccine? They could not be forced unless they have capacity. So if they don't have capacity, basically under the Mental Health Act, they could tell you, well, you are going to have to receive this on the basis that it's going to cause harm to themselves or others. So if we look back at C-19, am I getting this wrong, folks? You tell me. It seems to me that they could, under the Mental Health Act, if something like, let's say, H5N1 was deemed a serious harm to others or themselves, could they not coerce you into taking a jab?
Yes.
Yes.
It also goes towards your elderly patients or someone who was perhaps in a car accident and is now unconscious. They no longer have the capacity to speak for themselves. So that definition encompasses a whole wide range of people.
Exactly. And the vaccine part bothers me because the mRNA wasn't technically a vaccine, so they could just readjust the definition again. They're very focused on the word vaccine there and not encompassing of all the things that they could force upon you.
Even on Pfizer and Moderna's website, they refer to it not as a vaccine, but as a gene therapy. But in order to qualify under mandate, they changed gene therapy. Our government officials, our public health officials changed vaccine or gene therapy to vaccine. Who's to say they wouldn't change it back to gene therapy, and now all of a sudden it's a medical procedure to save others?
Right.
Also, who determines if they're going to harm themselves or others? Who determines that?
Correct.
Yes.
Well, that's exactly what they did when they started the whole vaccine agenda back in 2020. When we first started the rallies, that was one of the first things that we pointed out, was the fact that the government was making these decisions about what was safe and effective and what wasn't, right? And I think that's the key. You know, when we start listening to Danielle talk about rights and freedoms, We have to, I mean, I know everybody on the panel understands that, but our freedom starts within, and our connection to God. There's no freedom given to us by government. We allow them to pretend they give us our freedom, but that's not what happens. What happens is we give up our rights to allow them to designate pieces of freedom. And what we've seen in our country is that they've totally destroyed anything called freedom because we're believing in a system that doesn't work. And the way the system is set up right now is to undermine our rights slowly but surely over a period of time, so there are no rights. And this bill is just another example of the depreciation of our rights and, you know, what we actually had and what we have now. So if we go back 20 years, what we had, what we thought were rights back then, compare that to today, what we think we have as rights today, I mean, they've been dissolved more and more and more. And the reason they're doing this is because the less rights means we're more dependent on government. And this dependency on government for, you know, the yes, the approval, and all this nonsense is the way that it's been designed that we give up our rights. And our rights are innate to us through God, not from the government. And we should not be allowing the government to dictate any rights to us. I mean, yes, we've got some protocols, I get it, Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights really isn't, you know, like I went to court, you know, I had about $16,000 in tickets from the rallies that we did. We did over 50 rallies, for those that don't know what we were doing. 50 super rallies, worldwide rallies, and they were huge. And what we did is, in order to intimidate, they would bring out the AHS and give tickets. And I had about $16,000 in tickets. And I had to go to court, and, you know, we won a landmark battle on it, but it's still the hassle of it all. And when we were going through this process and they were coming there to lower the crowd sizes, what was going on is I was telling the people at the rallies, basically, you know, we'll take the tickets because we're going to win anyway. And we did, because our freedom isn't given to us. Our freedom is innate. And I think that's the problem. So we're not giving up rights. We have to exercise the fact that each generation has to fight harder to hold on to the rights. When we talk about property rights, we don't own property in Canada. And I think everybody knows that you don't own anything. The minerals are taken away by the multinational corporations. That's why we're so impoverished in this country, but we're fighting over the crumbs. And the crumbs are the things that are making us realize that more and more we don't have anything. Look at the poverty. Look at the poverty going through the roof. These aren't given to us, or the poverty is not given to us. We're allowing the poverty to happen because our resources are being stolen every day. The gas prices are being stolen, and we get complacent because we're Canadian. But we have to change this now, and starting with this bill up in the legislature, and Phil's been so gracious to set up a rally up there, and I think that's a great idea. But that's sort of what we should use as a starting point to really, we have to take back our country and get our rights back to the people, because right now the government has our rights and they administer some of them and give us some, telling us what we can and can't do. And during the whole hoax of the vaccine agenda, we saw just how bad and just how destructive that was, because it destroyed families, it destroyed businesses, it destroyed our economy, and it was a planned pandemic. It wasn't even real. It was a hoax. Who's talking about that anymore? Nobody. I mean, far as government.
I think you just got me a strike on YouTube. Chris.
Right, because we're in fear. We're in fear of what we're not supposed to say. So, I mean, this is, again, that's not freedom.
Well,
and I remember just one thing. Let me say one more thing here. I remember Danielle Smith, when we were doing the rallies, like we were getting like 3,000-4,000 people a week. And when I remember phoning up Danielle's show and trying to get on her show, because they were talking about the rallies and the masks, and they weren't talking about why we were doing the rallies. Why? What were we afraid of? Well, we were afraid of what was in the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. So Danielle wouldn't let me on the show to even talk about it. And I mentioned it to her at a town hall afterwards. I said, why wouldn't you let me on the show to tell why we were even there? And they did the same thing with Pastor Art, where they, the media would just spin, oh, he's kind of like this revolutionary guy for anti-vax or whatever it is. He's, you know, more of a Christian agenda. But that's not what it was about. It was to keep the truth from the people. And that's what the media did. That's what Danielle did. The whole thing was skewed. Anyway, that's sort of, you know, I was kind of, when I was listening to her talk there, I was almost vomiting. Because, I mean, some of the stuff she does is good, don't get me wrong. But there's other stuff that when you get into these, you know, the God-given rights and what she's doing, I think it's really imperative that we, the people, start questioning everything now. And because they're taking our rights away. And this is just another version of this in Alberta. But then we'll have the federal.
Absolutely. Let's turn the. I know Chris Weisdorf has some stuff to say about the wording of this, and I'd really like to make sure that we highlight that because, you know, we really have to make the case here of why these amendments are bad. And I think, I think Chris has got a few things to say. Chris, could you just introduce yourself to the other panelists and kind of our audience, and tell us a few things.
Okay, so first of all, I'm not in Alberta. I'm in Ontario. So I'm acutely aware of what's going on in Alberta and what has been going on there. Adam Skelly moved. He was run out of town, run out of the province. He's the only person who stood up to the lockdowns back in November of 2020 and in the whole country. And so he was crushed. He's in Alberta. I put together the experts on his case. It hasn't been heard yet. This is brought in 2021. We're going to be into 2025 when this is heard. In terms of calling out the great lie and talking about the pandemic, that it was a hoax or whatever you want to call it, I just call it the great lie, the narrative. Adam's case challenges that more than any other case on the face of the earth. It's the last man standing in terms of Adam he's the last man standing who has standing to actually be heard. Everything else is too late. It's 2 years past too late, and everything else it's all moot. So I, in terms of having some involvement with someone who's in Alberta right now, I do. In terms of challenging the law, even though, and this is the next thing, I'm not a lawyer. I play one on TV. I'm not a paralegal. I didn't go to law school. I have not even taken one class in some law school course. But because I sued the city of Toronto all the way to Court of Appeal from 2018 to 2020 because they picked a fight with me and I took it all the way. I have quite a legal education, I guess you can call it. By trial by fire, literally. So through my education, I have been working behind the scenes, and in some cases not behind the scenes, to make progress in the courts. And so the case, I guess, that I'm most well known for, where I was permitted to actually represent someone, was a Quarantine Act challenge. This is an appeal in Ontario regarding testing. That is the testing via the PCR test, the nasal swab test, the invasive tests that everyone was required to take coming into Canada. And I know it's a little bit different in Alberta and Saskatchewan because you're not parties signatories to Contraventions Act, but Ontario is and most of Canada is. And so they required people as a condition of re-entry into Canada, being a Canadian citizen. They did this to everyone, but they applied it to us equally, which was wrong. But they did it, and they got away with it. And they said, you have to test. If you don't test, you're going to get a massive ticket, $5,000 plus. There were families that got $40,000 worth of tickets. It was utterly insane. And so I, through a friend of a friend, I found someone who got screwed at trial. I said, let's appeal this. She said, I'm appealing it. I said, okay, well, let's see what you get. And she ended up getting all this, the transcripts and everything. And I said, you have a really good case. So long story short, I argue this, crushed the prosecution, and won this with absolutely nothing from the prosecution. They had nothing to say, and the judge gave it to us unequivocally. And this has been argued many times across Canada. It has never succeeded. I succeeded. The decision was rendered on June 26th, And a class actions may follow this. And that's a whole other thing I'd like to discuss with you. There's a class action, the Ingram class action. Ingram was mentioned earlier, Rebecca Ingram. She was the first person in Alberta to bring a lawsuit. I think it was December 9th or 10th of 2020. And this is with the JCCF. And there were many Ingram proceedings, but it ended with this August 2023 decision from, I said Germain, it's Romain, Justice Romain. It was a terrible decision. If you read the decision, it's awful. But she struck the public health orders. And following that, 6 weeks later, is a class action. And that class action in Alberta just got certified. It just got certified on October 30th. This is absolutely devastating to the government. And this is something that no one's really talked about this. And if you want to know one of the reasons for, I can't think of any other reason for bringing up the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. Why would they come up with this? It's to limit the government's liability. And so this is an absolutely huge lawsuit because I didn't think this would get certified. Certainly not anytime soon. It's got certified a little over a year later. To be clear, there are a lot of class actions that do not get certified. The G20, which is the largest mass arrest in Canadian history, this is in June of 2010 in Toronto. They brought a class action, didn't get anywhere. The CSASP, they brought a class action in January of 2021 against the COVID measures, against Bonnie Henry, still not certified. Okay, the Roth and Company brought this class action, just got certified. And what does it heavily reference? The Alberta Bill of Rights. So I want to go over this with you to make it very clear about what's at stake, what's going on right now that can affect the government and affect the government in the future for a long period of time. And I want to go over the specific language, the statutory language. This overview. I'm tossing that out. I'm going to the actual language of the act, of what they want to do, rather than some summary or an opinion on an opinion. I'm going to go to the actual
Right,
act.
I see that. Fair enough. Yeah.
You posted it earlier here. There's the fact sheet. Actually, that's the wrong thing. You got to go to the actual Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. So I'm going to go.
I think I have that on screen actually. Is this what you're talking about?
No, that's Hansard. Those are the arguments. That's a reading,
Sorry,
second
okay.
reading. You got to go to the actual act. So I'm going to go over this with everyone, and I just invite a broader discussion. I wanted to be clear about what I discussed with Phil about this. I want to discuss three things. There's more of like three and a half, four things, but there were three primary things. The first thing, and this is in relation to how it's written into the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. The first thing mentions due process. The second thing, it mentions consent, the whole thing with the medical stuff, and then it mentions reasonable limits. And the last thing that's mentioned is damages. So I want to go over that order with you, and I want to make it really easy, very user-friendly for everyone to understand it. I want everyone to actually look at the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. I'll find it for you, just like I've looked at it. I've only really looked at this. Yes, I've downloaded the summary that you have, but the fact sheet, whatever you want to call it, you got to really look at the language of the act. It's not complicated. It's not written in Chinese. It's something you should know. You should read it. You should understand it as a normal person, a normal citizen living in Alberta, and how this can affect your rights. So I'm going to explain it to you, read it, and then go and ask a legal professional about it. Discuss it. Talk about it with people in your community. So I'm going to go over this with you now, and then I'd like to invite a broader discussion on the actual language, what it says in the act, in the bill, rather than what some kind of fact sheet says. This is it. Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act, this 2024. This is critical. And so I'm going to read it. I'm going to go over this stuff with you, and I'm going to discuss the plain English language interpretation, as well as what the Supreme Court has ruled on this stuff. This is so important because they're deliberately using language that if it went to the King's Bench, the Superior Court, the High Court in Alberta, and then it went to the Court of Appeal, they would just go to what the Supreme Court's already said, either on Canadian Bill of Rights case law or charter case law. So if you use particular language, it's going to fall within the sphere of that case law. This is so important. The lawyers very carefully wrote this to get within certain loopholes written by the Supreme Court, or certain jurisdictional arguments long decided by the Supreme Court. So I'm going to go over this with you, and feel free to interrupt, but I want to go over this because this is so important by discussing what they actually have here in the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act, as opposed to what they already have long had in the Alberta Bill of Rights. So the first thing they want to change is the preamble. And blah, blah, blah. But it ends with including during times of emergency. So they take out some stuff and then they add in including during times of emergency. And so the rest is irrelevant. If you go to the next page, so this is page 2. It's really confusing. Actually, the way that they've written this is super confusing. It should not be written like this. They have 2 page 1s and 2 page 2s and 2 page 3s. Who the hell writes something like that? It should be sequentially numbered like anything. It's not. So this is page 2 according to like what Adobe Acrobat is telling me. Page 2 of 16. And the preamble is on there. And the last part of the preamble is including during times of emergency. The next page says explanatory notes. And it says the preamble presently reads, and there's 3 paragraphs. What they should add is right under, it's in the second paragraph, enacted the fundamental freedoms and derived and all that stuff. Enacted the Canadian Bill of Rights in order to enshrine the protection of those rights and freedoms in Canada. And then it should say right after that, they should add in including during times of emergency, and leave the rest the same, because this is fine. The preamble as it is fine. They don't need to change it. They just need to add in including during times of emergency. It's very simple. This is a hatchet shop what they have right now. They just need to add in that one line to the end of the second paragraph of the preamble. The next thing is on page 4. It says law of Alberta and all of that, and taking of property. The next part right after this is life, liberty, and security of the person, the right to enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except to the extent authorized by law and except by due process of law. And the next thing, it says something else about property, and it uses...
Hold on. I think I've lost the spot. I'm trying to keep up to you. So
no problem. This is page 4.
4 in the acrobat.
4 out of 16. 4 out of 16.
Gotcha. Okay.
Got it? So it says here, 4 out of 16. It actually says section 4. It says section 1 is amended, and there's a bunch of stuff. And it says A.1, the right to the enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived thereof except to the extent authorized by law and except by due process of law. And if you go to the next page, it has the old wording. And it says, it presently reads, the right of the individual to liberty, security of the person, and the enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except by due process of law. So this is my first major point that I discussed with Phil, and I've mentioned it on Facebook, and I haven't done a full analysis yet, and I haven't written it yet, other than comments on Facebook and maybe on Telegram, and maybe I wrote something on X. The point here is due process of law does not mean what you think it means. It means something completely different in the United States than it does mean in Canada. How do I know this? The Supreme Court went into this in 1986, and they split apart the meanings of due process and natural justice and fundamental justice. And why do they do this? Because they wanted to take apart what's in section 7 of the charter, and they had to go into that. But what does fundamental justice mean? And they compared it to natural justice. They mentioned the Bill of Rights, because it says fundamental justice in the Bill of Rights, right? And it's like, well, fundamental justice in 1960 meant something in fundamental justice in 1986. And then due process means something very different in Canada compared to the United States. In Canada, it just means a legislative process. So if something is legislatively sound, meaning it's an act of Parliament or the legislature, or it's subordinate legislation, that is a bylaw, directive, order, or regulation made pursuant, that is under a statute, that is something that would be recognized as due process of law. So they can take away your rights with like some order. It doesn't have to be debated. Due process is a loaded term. I know people think it means something in Canada. It doesn't. So what needs to be here instead? And it says, and I just read to you all the relevant stuff, but they have here, I'm fine with the wording other than due process. They just need to say here, the right to the enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived thereof, except to the extent authorized by law in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Why? Because the Supreme Court has elevated that term, principles of fundamental justice, to a high and mighty substantive protective process. It's substantive protection. So if you combine property rights with fundamental justice, the Supreme Court has tried to duck this before. They know what it means. I know what it means. Unfortunately, not many people know what it means, unless you have some constitutional lawyers that kind of looked at the nitty gritty. I've looked at this because I use these arguments when I sued the city of Toronto. So it has to be in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. As soon as you do that, it's bulletproof. Your property rights are intact. They're bulletproof. The only way they can get rid of them is they have to go into the actual statute and remove them. They have to go into another statute and say, this statute operates notwithstanding the Bill of Rights. So that's the only way. You can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of it. So that is critical. That due process, if you change it from due process to in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice, you gain massive rights by the courts that are recognized, long recognized for nearly 40 years in this country. So that's the first point I wanted to make. I don't know if you wanted to ask something about that before going into the most problematic part, which is page 6. The absolute gutter part of this bill is page 6, but I can go into that next. I just wanted to see if anyone wanted to mention anything about due process.
Yeah, let's open it up for discussion. Marilyn, what are your comments on Chris's observations here?
First of all, I think he's an extremely intelligent man and has raised some excellent points. I'm not going to make any comments at all about the preamble. I think he's correct. With regard to property, and this is probably a little academic, I'm not 100% with you on believing that in accordance with the principles of justice as it relates to property, that would be the right way to go. Not that it's the wrong way to go, but right now, all property really is owned by the King of England in Canada. And would that really protect us? I think that's a topic probably for a different day and a different time.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Interesting. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, listen, if you have, I understand about real property, that's yeah, no question, with Crown land and all that, real, with real property that is like real estate, yes. A lot of that is tenuous because, you know, there's everything to do with property taxes, and you're essentially renting land and all that, and you have a right to use the property, but not. Yeah, I get all that. So yeah, that's a good point. And then you can talk about unalienable rights and all of that, because the unalienable rights are clearly not in there. If you look at the Ontario Human Rights Code, they mention inalienable rights. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says unalienable rights. And that just means the rights are granted by God, or they're inherently granted if you're an atheist, whatever. That they're there, and they're not granted by government, so they can't be taken away by government. And that's what that means. It's not in here. Perhaps it should be there. I'm a big believer in inherent rights, but Canada does not recognize inherent rights, inalienable rights. We don't recognize that. Our courts do not recognize that.
Chris, could I just ask you to clarify? Am I hearing you correctly? Your interpretation is, if the government just uses due process of law, all they have to do to take your property away is basically pass some piece of legislation, and they can do what they want.
No, less.
Is that
Far
what you're
less.
saying here, or
far less?
Is that why you want to use the other language? Can you
That's-
explain in more detail?
It's far less. That's the whole problem. I wish it had something to do with the legislature had to convene and go through 2 readings, committee, a 3rd reading, and then reach royal assent. Meaning there's 3 debates and there's a committee. Nope. They can strike it with subordinate legislation. They can remove someone authorized according to statute, and this could be you could drive a truck through the way the Supreme Court has authorized this stuff. If you're back in 2020 in December, the Hudson's Bay, they brought an application, divisional court in Ontario. And this is one of the first challenges. In fact, it was the first decided challenge in all of Canada. And they said, well, the regulations that were made under the Reopening Ontario Act, which shut down the businesses in Ontario, that the regulations, well, I mean, they're within the scope of the act. I mean, and they referenced a case called, to me, it's Katz Group v. Canada, v. Ontario. It's, a lot of judges refer to it as Kate's. I don't know why, and so in there it just said, if it's, as long as it's not completely unrelated to the statute, it's going to pass muster. So the Supreme Court, in I think it was 2013 or 2014, when that case was decided, the Supreme Court gave the legislatures and Parliament immense power to just write a bunch of legislation, like write some sort of an act, and then conferred very broad authority to make, as I said, directive, bylaw, regulation, or order. So someone could make some sort of an order, and well before you can even challenge it in court, they've already ripped away your rights. Like, you can't even do anything. You are suddenly you wake up one day and you don't have any property rights. That's why due process of law is garbage in Canada. You do not want that anywhere. In 1972 and in 1960, so it's 1960 Bill of Rights and Canadian Bill of Rights, 1972 Alberta Bill of Rights. It meant something way, way, way different back then than it does today. So are they right to want to update the Bill of Rights? Of course. I do think some changes need to be made, just like I think the Charter needs to, and the Constitution, we need some serious amendments. But nevertheless, this is one of those things which is outdated. It will not help you. It actually hurts you. It makes it easier for the government to take your rights away. So I've gone over that. The next part I just want to mention now is this is the most problematic. This is the part that everyone agrees. We all agree that this needs to be ripped out and left on the cutting room floor. This is page 6 out of 16. Okay, out of the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. It says the right of the individual, you already read it, but with capacity and medical care and medical procedure and coerced and consent, and then it throws in firearms in there for some reason, even though I fully agree with, we need very strong protection against the right to bear firearms. It should be a constitutional amendment. But nevertheless, it's in there. It's not going to really help in this case because it's a federal power and all of that. So it's a bit of a gimmick. But I'm okay with it. It doesn't really help. It doesn't really harm. Maybe it mildly helps a little bit. But other than that, the rest is garbage. And I'll tell you why. It just says, regardless of what it says here, what doesn't it say here? This is so important. It's like the elephant in the room. It's just not mentioned. It doesn't mention, and we everyone here knows, if you've looked at anything legally since 2020, the Nuremberg Code is brought up. Okay, even the Nuremberg Code is not a treaty. There are no signatories. It's not binding law. It's nothing. It's an aspirational document. It should be a treaty. It should be binding. It's not. In Ontario, we have the Healthcare Consent Act. You don't have one in Alberta. In BC, they have a really watered-down version. They had something like that in Nova Scotia, repeal it. In Ontario, Healthcare Consent Act. Did that help us? It did not. It says outright what informed consent is. It's the strictest definition of informed consent in Canada. It didn't help us. It should have helped us. It didn't. In this, it should have the same thing. It should have the same definition in the Healthcare Consent Act in Ontario as in the Alberta Bill of Rights. Instead, it has all this garbage. What should be in there, it should actually say informed consent, not consent. And
Good
why
one.
do I say this? It's not just because it's in the Nuremberg Code. This came up. Everyone knows what UNDRIP is. Everyone knows what UNDRIP is. And Canada implemented Bill C-15. It was passed. It was rammed through. It implemented UNDRIP in Canada. How do I know this? Because we were the only group that opposed it. The Concerned Constituents of Canada. Jody and I are on the board. Well, I'm one of the co-founders. We opposed it. What was one of the big contentious points in Hansard, in the arguments in Parliament regarding C-15 and UNDRIP? It was FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent. It's like informed consent on steroids. They made a big deal out of this about that. We don't get it. You don't get it in Alberta. Why not? Because they want to water down your rights. And the second thing they don't have in there is they don't have bodily autonomy. Forget vaccines or whatever. You either have bodily autonomy or not. And again, I'm referencing something that the Supreme Court has opined on. The Supreme Court in a 1999 decision, Uinchek, it defined informed consent. Not informed consent. Sorry. It defined bodily autonomy. And it went back. It did a deep dive. It went back to 1770. It said these principles go back to at least 1770. And it's the strongest decision ever written by the Supreme Court about what bodily autonomy is. It's an assault case. It's about Section 265, subsection 3, which, in my opinion, applies to a lot of the COVID-related crimes fomented by the government. It said fear, fraud, or authority. That vitiates, it disappears consent, especially informed consent. So it should have informed consent in there. Forget about treatment. Who cares? It should say informed consent, whatever they want you to do. It is incumbent on the government or anyone, Party B, asking Party A, you, the individual, is incumbent upon them to seek your consent, not incumbent upon you to seek a garbage exemption. And what did they do from the very beginning? I saw the first threat letters in all of Canada in August of 2021. What did they do? They reversed onus on everyone. They said, you have to seek an exemption rather than the government or your union or some other garbage employer seeking your consent. Even though the law in Ontario, not in Alberta, in Ontario, it very strictly says you must seek informed consent. And it's very strictly and very heavily defined and very obviously defined. And what did they do here? They reversed onus, and they'll do it again. So you need to define, forget about this garbage. And I want to mention one other thing. This is so critical again. If you go to the food and drugs regulations from Canada, okay, federal government, food and drug regulations, how many times do you think it mentions COVID vaccines in the food and drug regulations? Any guess how many times it mentions food and drug? Under the food and drug regulations mentions something to do with a COVID-19 vaccine. Any guesses? Does anyone want to throw out a guess how many times they mention it? The answer, what'd you say?
Has to be zero.
Yeah, it's zero. You know what's in there instead? It says many times, it says a designated COVID-19 drug. So it says it again, many times, designated COVID-19 drug. And that can mean anything. It can mean anything that they want. So it doesn't say vaccine. It never says vaccine. Mm-hmm. And what does it say in the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act? The vaccine. It's irrelevant. And I said this with Pierre Poilievre or Daniel Smith or anyone. It shouldn't mention vaccines. It shouldn't mention COVID. It should say in bodily autonomy and informed consent. And it should say in the preamble the primacy of the individual. We really need to to have that in Canada. In British common law, doctrine, tradition, and practice, it protects individual rights. It doesn't protect collective rights. That's why Section 1 is garbage, because it basically takes collective rights and it places them over individual rights. And so while I'm okay with the notwithstanding clause, if the government needs to put all that power that they have, the legislature has, where they got to go through 3 readings and committee, and in the federal government 6 readings and 2 committees, essentially, if they don't want to go through that process of putting in a notwithstanding clause in some act, they shouldn't be doing it. The government's too big. They shouldn't be relying on some judge to say, "Oh, well, I think it's reasonable." No, that's garbage. And
I think Brad has something to say. Let's hear from Brad. Brad, give us your 2 cents.
I think, we can talk about all the rights and all of this stuff, what's not in these charters and these amendments, etc. The reality is when COVID did come and we did see everybody standing up against the nonsense and the lies, we didn't care whether there was an order by the judge. We didn't care if there was an order, what the legislation said. We didn't care at all, because we were standing up for our inherent rights. And that's what we have to remember. A lot of this stuff is just there to mess with our brain. And I agree with it. There's stuff we can use in the court system, but what we found during COVID as well is the court system's totally corrupted, and the whole system is a mess. And we have to realize we have to step back and fix the system, because all we're doing is painting over something that is corrupted. The total system's corrupted. Ottawa's corrupted, and the way they interact with our lands, property, we don't own anything. We don't have property. What we do is we're paying leases, like Chris said. And that's true. That's exactly what's happening for those that have studied common law or gotten into the reality of our times. What we really don't have is anything that gives us freedom. And what freedom is something that we stood up for. And we saw it during the freedom movement, where people actually started taking it, seriously for a change. Because in Canada, we're very complacent. And we'll try to do things. But now I think we're at a time where our rights are dissipated. There's no rights anymore. And we can argue about the clauses and the different amendments, etc., or discuss them. But what we need to do is take back our country and take back our province. And I don't mean by, going through the process. We need to stand up and find another way to do it, because when we stood up in unity during the movement, and I saw it from the very beginning, in August 2020 was our first rally, and we went all the way into the 2021s. And what that showed is the growth and how it live streamed to millions every week, and the responses and how people started coming together. And that's what gave us the power. That was our power. That's where we started to come together, unity. We started to see we weren't separated. We weren't divided by political agendas, political parties, political colors. We came together for we, the people. And I think this is really what we have to look at personally. I think, these amendments, I get it. Yes, we have to fight, go to legislature, stand up, be counted. But in reality, I think we really need to step back and say, there's something wrong with the system, and we're wasting a lot of our precious time trying to, wordsmith it with the lawyers, the top lawyers in the country and the top legal system, because we're just amending things that are corrupt. It's not a system for we the people, or for and by the people. It really isn't. We don't own our resources. We don't get any resource payments. We don't, everything is set up in a way that is to undermine our rights and slowly take them away and impoverish our society. And that's what we're seeing now, the impoverishment of our society, which then gives the government more power, because they start giving us the gifts of social services or welfare or things like this. So this is where our problem starts. We have to take back our country. But in this, these things like the vaccine mandates was a catalyst to open up the awareness that something is definitely wrong in our system. And we can't take it back by voting one of the uniparty colors each election, because that doesn't work. Look 20 years ago, have we improved or gotten worse? in our whole political structure. We've gotten worse. Our country's a mess more now than it ever was. And it's because, I was just in Vancouver, Hastings Street, packed with people, just drug addicts and people without homes. And they're not all drug addicts. A lot of them just don't have anywhere to go.
Brad,
they're displaced in our society.
I'm gonna reel you in. I agree with a ton of what you're saying. What I'm gonna do is take just a very short musical break for anybody that needs to have a bio break. And when we come back, I want to talk to Sherry Strong, kind of about this capacity issue, which I think is another kind of prong in this whole thing. And then we're going to open up discussion maybe to some of the bigger issues I'd like to touch on with Rick and Jody, some things about Bill C-293, the treason file, because all of this is playing a factor. And, Brad, I think that, the treason file is something we need to push because that is going to certainly lead to some changes. So stay with us, folks. We're going to suggest taking some action here in the next week at the Alberta Legislature to stand up against these proposed changes, and we need people to turn out, help us out.
Well, there's a little bitty thing called vitamin D. If you mix it up with some vitamin C and a little B12 and some zinc, then you'll be fine. Yeah, we can't talk about chloroquine, can't even mention ivermectin, and the hashtag natural immunity is getting censored all the time. Just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, they don't really care about your health. Just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, all they really care about is wealth. All right, we're going to talk about some financials now. Well, the vaccine industry makes a heap, lining the pockets of the global elite, talking over $60 billion just last year. Yeah, the data is out there, and you want to get wiser, over 30 billion in ya, and that's just Pfizer. So much profit, so little liability. Just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, they don't really care about your health. Just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, all they really care about is wealth. All right, is it okay if I get a little conspiratorial with this verse? You guys okay with that? All right. Well, the deep state service corporations, along with the United Nations, rolling out their evil, diabolical plans. You can't trust the World Health Organization or Bill Gates' plan for depopulation. That's what this jab is, and that's why we make a stand. Just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, they don't really care about your health. Just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, all they really care about is wealth. Once more, just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, they don't really care about your health. Just say hell no, to Big Pharma. Yeah, all they really care about is wealth.
Legends never die when the world is calling you. Can you hear them screaming out your name? Legends never die, they become a part of you. Every time you bleed for reaching greatness, relentless, you'll survive. They never lose hope when everything's cold and the fighting's near. It's deep in their bones, they're running to smoke when the fire's fierce. Oh, pick yourself up, 'cause legends never die. When the world is calling you, can you hear them screaming out your name? they're written down in eternity. But you'll never see the price it costs. 'Cause scars collected all of their lives. When everything's lost, they pick up their hearts and avenge defeat. Before it all starts, they suffer through harm just to touch a dream. Oh, pick yourself up, 'cause legends never die. When the world is calling you, can you hear them screaming out your name? Legends never die. They become a part of you. Every time you bleed for reaching greatness, legends never die. When the world is calling out your name, begging you to fight. Pick yourself up once more. Pick yourself up, 'cause legends never die. When the world is calling you,
Wow. And the-
out your name. Legends never die. They become a part of you. Every time you bleed.
And what?
Excuse me.
That was Scarlet Sins, Legends Never Die. I believe it's a cover, and they dedicated that to Dan and Sean Hartman. Sherry, let's talk about this clause regarding capacity. Why don't you introduce yourself to, both to the panelists that don't know you and the viewers at home, your take and your experience, and we'll segue that into commentary on capacity.
Sure. So my background, before COVID started in 2016, I had a business called Sweet Freedom, which was helping people beat sugar addiction and processed food, junk food addiction. The reason you've invited me here is after COVID, I actually moved to Alberta to keep my parents out of a nursing home. And so I was their medical advocate. And as a result, I was a medical advocate for other people as well, including them in hospital, and really got attention through my role as the Alberta Provincial Director for Children's Health Defence Canada. So I interviewed Daniel Nagase when Mel Bruchet was being illegally detained. And what's actually happening, I'm in two minds about the kind of the attention to the law, because we had laws in place to protect people, but they were broken left, right, and center. We became a lawless society. So while I still think it's important, I think we also need to understand is when they're trying to bring in a new world order, they're not going to follow the letter of the law. Not saying that we don't actually make sure, to make our efforts to make sure it's right. But Mel Bruchet was reporting the stillbirths in Vancouver hospitals, which had exponentially exploded. We're talking 2,000% increase in stillbirths. And when he was trying to bring attention to it, they actually used the capacity issue and used an argument that he had with his neighbor to render him what they said he didn't have capacity, and they basically took him to the mental hospital. And it took a lot of fighting to actually get him out. He was drugged against his will. He was mistreated in that area, and they tried to make him look crazy to the public. Now, a case closer to home is a local firefighter was refusing to get the jabs, and his wife took great issue with that. She said she was going to leave him if he didn't get vaccinated, get the COVID injections. And when he refused, she had a powerful position within AHS and managed to get him certified as a mental patient at the Alberta Hospital. Wow. And the actual incident in which she had him certified, he was downstairs with his family and her, and they were all mocking him for not getting the vaccination. He was feeling humiliated and upset and betrayed by his family. He went upstairs to their bedroom. He was alone in the bedroom, and he threw the channel changer in anger. And that was the inciting incident that she managed to get him determined as mentally, unsound. And so once you're in the Alberta Hospital, in those places, there was 2 psychiatrists. He didn't understand what was actually happening. He was incredibly innocent. He went obligingly in the police car. He had a non-alcoholic beer with him. They let him take a beer. I don't know anyone who doesn't have mental capacity they would allow in the back of a police car with a glass bottle of anything. And she had him certified, and it took 10 days of absolute advocating on his behalf. Going in there, I was on the phone. I was calling every single person I knew. There were so many firefighters who, believed it was unjust, but wouldn't speak up for fear of being canceled, losing their jobs. And there were people who were manipulated by this firefighter's wife to basically believe that there might be something wrong with him. When I spoke with him, he was a little nervous, as I think most people would be being admitted to a psych hospital, especially when you're sane. But there was nothing wrong with his mental capacity, absolutely nothing wrong. And we advocated continually. They tried several times to coerce him to sign a paper that ultimately we found out would have had him committed indefinitely. And he refused, and we were actually on the phone at the time when they came in and they sedated him against his will because he refused to sign this paper. The long and short of it, we had a bit of a miracle in that a former nurse who was now a lawyer, drove up from Calgary to Edmonton, and it was through her insistence and just basically waiting at the hospital to get him released because they were playing all kinds of shenanigans to keep him in there. So when we talk about laws, there were laws in place. What happened with him and what happened with Mel were absolutely illegal. The only reason he's not pressing charges against, his former wife is because she's the mother of his children. And we see in a lot of cases where these things happen and family members are absolutely traumatized, as happens in hospitals. They do all kinds of things that are actually against the law. And so registering people's capacity, it can be completely subjective and can be manipulated, and it depends on who's signing the paper. And what we witnessed throughout this COVID business era is the absolute lawlessness and corruption of our legal system and our policing system that aided and abetted crimes against humanity. And unfortunately, it's still going on. So these things are still happening. I hear about them all the time. It's not just, with people being rendered insane or being forced vaccinated, children being, forced procedures because judges are corrupt, not following, any kind of science. And what I saw, the reason I knew that COVID was a scam was when I was in Australia. I was sat on boards I was the Victorian Director of Nutrition Australia, and I sat on boards that consulted to the government on public health policy. And that's how I knew in March 2020, I was starting to post, guys, this is not what they're saying it is. The government does not care about your health. And so while they're passing these laws, they want to be seen to be doing the right things. But there is so much corruption. In all fairness, I will actually say something. Danielle Smith, I don't know her personally. I know people who know her personally for just as long as you have known her, Marilyn, and they swear that her intentions are good. But what I'll tell you, it doesn't matter if Jesus Christ was actually the Premier of Alberta. he would be in a den of vipers. There are people within her party, in her office, and beyond in AHS they're completely corrupt, and they have an anti-human agenda. And so even if she had the purest intentions, the purest heart, and was the most capable person in the world, you're fighting a system that took centuries to actually set up, and decades of corruption, that it's going to take a lot more than us just looking at the letter of the law. It's going to take a lot more than us sitting, protesting, because if you actually look at, laws weren't changed because of our protests. People might have been alerted to certain things, but I think we have to actually work a lot more collaboratively, and yes, stand to hold people in power accountable, but also understand that we are in a lawless time that's going to take a lot more than just amending certain clauses within the law.
Right.
Agreed.
Yep. Well said.
Agreed.
Yeah. Don't forget, protests themselves are a form of consent, because you're entering into their game and you're saying, we don't like it, we're not happy with it. But by protesting, you're saying, we don't have the power to change it, so we want to make you change it. So protest in itself, the way we're doing it these days, is actually consent to their game. So it's until we decide that their laws are irrelevant, their illegalities are irrelevant, and we're just going to move on with our own conversation until we decide that the federal government itself is actually irrelevant. We're just going to play their game, and they're just going to laugh because they don't care.
Great point.
I should say that the government, the very basis for government, I don't know how many of you have done the thinking regarding this. There is a fantastic book written in 1849 called The Law by Carl Friedrich Bastiat. That is the basis for the Austrian School of Economics, even though he's French and the rest are Austrian. But anyway, the point is what he says in there, and it's a very easy read. It's a short read, under 100 pages. He says that government didn't come into being to give us our rights or anything like that. It came into being to protect life, liberty, and property. In the British common law system is the basis, in terms of property rights and contractual rights, the basis for a capitalist system. If you don't have British common law doctrine, tradition, and practice, you don't have a capitalist system. So that's why they specifically targeted British common law countries, United States, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. They targeted us harder than anyone else because they knew if they can get to our legal system and our capitalist system, they could destroy both, and they can destroy our way of life. So it's so important to realize that what the government has done is they have replaced life, liberty, and property. They've replaced the protections for life, liberty, and property, which goes back for centuries. They replaced that with a regulatory system, with an administrative law system, the administrative state, the deep state. They've replaced it and used that to remove life, liberty, and property. And in my opinion, and I think everyone would share this view, that if the government that destroys life, liberty, and property has lost its legitimacy to govern.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree. So the question is, how do we get it back?
Now that's a good question.
Right. So, here's.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
Go ahead, Brad.
Just a quick question. Just read the protests, and Chris had mentioned something of the protests. Like I get the walking in circles part of it, but the reality, what I noticed bringing people together under the movement or the rallies, and that just took on their own steam after a while, was that it gave people a sense of purpose. When the system was shut down, it allowed people to come together that created a lot of relationships, a lot of family, a lot of ongoing trust, knowing that we were all standing up together. So it had other purposes other than just standing there. And there was, bringing information to the people from the top doctors in the world that we brought on our stage as well, so that they could get real information that was verified. And because there was a lot more to it than, just basically rallies and people marching down the street. it was a lot more of bringing everyone together. And what we saw was, people crying, coming up to us and saying, we thought we were alone. And it showed a unity of where the power of we the people in so many different ways, right? And it was very heartfelt. And a lot of you came to the rally, so you know what I'm talking about. But it was just the family, Freedom Family. And it's something, I've got relationships now with people through the movement that I know who these people are because I know what they stood for. And they stood for truth and honor. And that was beautiful because in 2020, not many people were wanting to stand up. Most people were actually hiding. A lot of the politicians were all hiding till 2022, till it became popular. And then people, oh yeah, I want to stand up now and take a bow. But the reality was, I worked with people that were going every week in 20 below weather, setting up speakers, doing this, and seeing thousands of people come in 20 below weather, and then live streaming that around the world with top doctors on our stage so everybody could see why it was being done. And, it did have a multi-purpose, multi-faceted. Anyway, that's all I want to say about that. Sorry for interrupting.
You're right in that respect. The predatory powers that be have spent decades tearing apart nuclear families and communities. And so when this all hit 4 years ago, we all did think we were alone because we've been taught that we are alone, and we have been taught to be silent, and we've been taught not to critically think. So the rallies did do that, and the protests did do that. It brought those who were thriving in the knowledge that there is more and to question. It did bring those people together. So you're right. We started to establish communication. We started to establish relationships, and we started to understand that the nuclear family was far more important and necessary in order to beat these global predators. So I think that is a realization that did happen. So you're right. We may have been playing within their framework of the game, their agenda, but what they didn't count on was all of those relationships being built, and in that, the courage and the strength that started inspiring others to stand up and reconnect.
Yeah, those are good clarifications, and that's really good that you clarified and expanded upon my point. I also agree that the convoy was highly successful, and I know some people are of a different opinion of that, but after the convoy, I watched the mandates drop like dominoes across the country. But further to my point, I also watched people who were supposed to go away in vans and go and be put in quarantine hotels, and they said, no, thank you. They were not going to do that. And there was no power. At the end of the day, when you challenged the authority on that, there was nothing. They had nothing, and you could just keep walking. And I know Jody and a bunch of people went to hotels and said, just walk out. You don't have to be in these quarantine hotels. And they did. It wasn't a giant protest. It was just people saying, you know what, you don't have that authority. And they walked out, and they didn't have the authority. Jody is known for being the know your rights girl in the mall, and that video went super uber viral. And they sat there and they challenged them on the law, and the police backed down. And most people know that video. And so what it is people need to reclaim knowing their rights and knowing their authority and actually believing that authority. And that's where we're at. And it doesn't take thousands of people. It just takes one person to make change. And that's sort of what I was getting at. But you're right, the rallies, I will back off on that, and I'll acquiesce on that one. It did do a lot of good for people, especially in the sense that, we all felt isolated. We felt like we were crazy, like we're the only ones thinking what we were doing was, or the way we were thinking was just us. And then these rallies started to grow and grow and grow. And at the end of the day, we're fighting an informational war, and that did a lot of damage to their side. So you're right.
Well, we saw a lot of heroes. We saw a lot of heroes, the real heroes. And I'm not talking about myself because I don't care about that, but the real heroes like Tammy Haney and all the group, like they were there in 2020 and doing the whole, from the very beginning before we knew what was going to happen. We went to City Hall and they were coming with horses and they were giving us $2,500 tickets and just intimidation. They had snipers up on the roofs. Things like this that people have no idea about by the time the truckers went to Ottawa. And we're doing a film about it right now, actually, and it's going to be released very soon. It's a super cool. We've got all the footage from everything. It just tells a beautiful story. So that's coming out. But anyway, yeah, there's, you know, and I don't want to dwell on it. Yeah, it was amazing times because we were left alone. You know, it was like we were against the government. And when they put out an order, I mean, I got thrown in jail. I mean, I remember they just threw me in jail one week, just followed me from the rally because it was getting so big that City Hall was intimidated. So was Kenny. They just threw me in jail for no reason. They thought I would come out next week at the next rally and call down the police. And we did the opposite. We clapped for the police. And we said, they're our friends. They don't know, they can't, you know, they're in the middle. And we changed the narrative so they couldn't use the police against us. And after that, the police just stood with us. It was incredible. And Phil was there. Phil was there from the beginning. I remember Phil. And, you know, so many good people. These are intro. I remember these rallies, some of them. And it just became family after a while. It was really a beautiful.
I'd like to mention something here. Hi, I'm Rudy Bruce. I guess a lot of you know who I am. There I am. Over the last week or so, I've been touching on a very important aspect of what's happened so far. A lot has come out on the government with its stealing of the $400 billion. Now, I'm sure all of you are aware of that. The government is, and basically Trudeau's government is in hot water over this $400 billion. Okay. Now, if we take that, and also we take Danielle Smith of the that fiasco of Bill of Rights there, and a few other elements, and we use that as a stepping stone, and we really address the homelessness problem in Canada, because you're dealing with 2 million people that are going to a food bank. Okay, not to mention now, I think that number is pretty high too, along with the people that are living in tents and motorhomes and all of this. Okay, if we could focus on the homeless problem in Canada, and we really get that message out to the homeless, the ones that are living in tents and the ones that are living in motorhomes and the ones that are barely making it on welfare and the rest of it, okay? If we all started focusing on that, okay, and then we try and get these people to start coming to a rally, to try and start getting them involved in a major rally, because in our previous protests, aside from the trucker convoy, we really never hit a big massive people, okay? And that's what our target should be, is to really blow this up, okay? To hit a massive amount of people, to get the narrative. And we could do this, like, we don't have to have people traveling to Ottawa or anything. Like, we could get this provincial standing right across the country and really start addressing the homelessness, okay? We've got Christmas coming up. We're going to have a lot of people that are going to be hurting this Christmas because
absolutely
they have no money, okay?
Hey, Rudy, would it surprise you that I'm 2 months away from homelessness?
Yeah, it's a major problem. So if we all band together, the panel that we've got here, and I'm sure there's many others, we can get into this. Now, I'm also going to touch on the thing that Kellyanne Wolf has done. She's got herself a hold of these homes, tiny homes or whatever, and she's got this thing going on. She's got, I don't know how many homes coming in, and we can step off on that as well, and really hammer this homelessness problem to all Canadians.
I agree with you, Rudy, and this is, that's basically a symptom of this much larger problem. So let me refocus the panel on, let's talk about Bill C-293. I want Connie to lead on this segue. Bill C-293 has been snuck in 2023, and there is a major push right now to get that up and awareness on that. We're writing senators. We've got a tool that's out there that I'm going to put on screen right away. Now, what's happening with Alberta Bill 24 is creating a lot of suspicion in terms of the timing, because Bill C-293 is effectively bringing in United Nations, World Health Organization policy directly into Canadian statute. Now that, in coordination with this Alberta Bill 24, seems very suspicious that they would want to water down our local protection against something so nebulous as Bill C-293. And so we'll start with that, and then we are going to quickly segue into, Rudy, what I believe is the issue that is going to get those thousands of people out in not this coming week, but the following week, to protest what's going on with the Alberta Bill of Rights. So Connie, let's start with you. Tell us all about what you're up to, and go.
Well, I'm part of the Stop C-293 committee, and this Alberta bill parallels C-293. And if you take a step back and look at what the Alberta government tried first with Bill 20, which would have given the provincial government power over all the municipalities. And that wasn't by accident, because the United Nations back in 1994, I think it was, put out the municipal primer on the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. That went to all the municipalities. Something that a lot of people don't understand or haven't researched it yet is the Alberta government put out a guidebook for municipal development plans, that every municipality in Alberta follows this guidebook into making their municipal development plans. And if you go through it and read it, it becomes pretty obvious that this government is fully aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Two paragraphs in, or well, there's several paragraphs that are concerning. The worst one: respecting the landowner's right to the use and enjoyment of their land, and restricting those rights only to the extent necessary for the greater public good and public health. That's in the Alberta government guideline for all the municipalities to put into their development plans. It's pretty scary when you look at that, and then take a look at what they're doing to Bill 24, and then couple that in with C-293, because basically what it's doing is it's setting the stage to centralize all this power into the World Health Organization. Yep. And if you go back to C-19, when I guess it was afterwards, the chief medical officer, who is the one in control, he did a video saying Alberta Health Services takes their direction from the World Health Organization. I sent you that clip, Bill, in Messenger. But it's really alarming when you put all these pieces together. So they're using Alberta as ground zero, the testing ground for the measures that concentrate all the power into the hands of the unelected officials. They're aligning the provincial with the federal actions, which override all your municipal. And right in this bill, one of the things that when you were playing her clip, I went and pulled up and highlighted it. She says, refers to them, where is it? We think that this is going to recalibrate the relationship between provincial governments and all those who get the power through provincial legislation to ensure that every action that they take is done through the lens of ensuring that they respect the property rights of those that they govern. Somebody needs to tell this Alberta government, they don't govern us. That is not their job. They are there to manage the resources and whatnot. They don't govern us. And people have just lost track of that. But then if you go to the second section where she says that she wants to look into putting it into where the provincial government has the highest rank of authority, which means it supersedes anything in your provincial or in your municipal.
Hey, Connie, I've got that clip ready to go if you want me to play it. 13
Yeah,
seconds.
it's only a couple of seconds.
Okay, let me bring that up.
We've been monitoring the international situation very closely, and we are guided by recommendations that come out of agencies such as the World Health Organization.
And then he says the Public Health Agency of Canada, which, for anybody who hasn't been listening to Lawyer Lisa, is a national focal point of the WHO.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Alberta takes their guidance from. So there's no denying that Danielle Smith knows 100% that she has signed on with the global agenda. This is C293, in essence, is putting into Canadian law all of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right, and so the timing of that is pretty suspicious. So the bill was passed October 27th, 2023. It's now second reading in the Senate. Pierre Poilievre has not come out and loudly exclaimed that this is kind of in the works and a big threat. He's been solely focused on the taxation issue, which I understand is a populist issue, but isn't it kind of important to draw attention in all conservative circles across the country that, hey, Bill C-293 is bringing basically WHO policy directly into Canadian statute. We voted against it, but guys, you need to write your senators. That's not Pierre Poilievre saying that. That's Connie Shields saying that, right? Mm-hmm. So why is he not dealing with that? Why is he not alarming the public? Of course, I challenged this guy in person, March 27th, 2024, at his Axe the Tax rally, asking him these questions about the WHO IHR, asking him questions about the National Citizens Inquiry. He didn't bother to mention to me that this C-293 thing is lurking in the background. And so now here we've got Danielle Smith, after, I would say, at least a 2.5-year campaign within the freedom movement to bring attention to the Bill of Rights and how it might protect us, whether it be the federal version or a provincial version. Now all of a sudden Danielle Smith takes up that charge and has this bill, and here's these caveats that are basically saying, well, we're going to add more rights, but we can take them away, if let's say a health czar at the federal level decides that, oh, by the way, we're closing chicken farms because of H5N1. You're a danger to yourself and those around you because you won't take it. So we're going to institutionalize you, make sure you get those jabs, right? That's kind of the picture we're looking at. So go, just like Rudy Bruce is pointing out, hey, how do we stop this? We've heard conjecture that, well, the written law doesn't really protect you. Brad said, hey, we went out there, we protested these things anyways. We were out there when the rules should have protected us. Well, okay, fine. But maybe they didn't hammer as hard on us this last time because they didn't have a big gaping Swiss cheese Charter One size hole in the middle of the Bill of Rights. That's kind of the way I'm looking at it. So if Pierre Poilievre is not, hey, alarming people, if Danielle Smith is not alarming people, then, it's kind of like, okay, people, we have to sound the alarm for ourselves here. And this leads us all to the treason. Are we ready to segue to treason? Or I believe actually, hold on.
Always.
There's
so much, isn't there?
There's so much theater in this, though, Phil, that a lot of people don't see it. Like leading up to the AGM, there was some conservatives, all this infighting, so-called infighting within the UCP party. Yet I saw it right away that, no, this is membership drive. They aren't actually fighting. There isn't white hats and black hats like they're trying to claim within the party. Yeah. It was a membership drive, and they drove that membership through the roof.
Yep.
But what else they did that a lot of people don't realize is a supporter paid to bus hundreds of Muslim children, 14 and up, to that AGM because in the UCP policy, 14 and up are allowed to vote. They bussed hundreds of Muslim children in there to vote to keep the membership up. And that supporter paid their membership and their $400 into the AGM. It's so corrupt. It goes beyond your wildest dreams. But that guy who funded that is also part of the whole WEF crowd.
Right. Okay, Chris, I want to segue to you. You had a few points that I know you wanted to add to the Bill of Rights discussion. So let's do that.
Yeah, it just briefly, because I mentioned it earlier, but I didn't close it off. I didn't put a bow on it. I mentioned earlier regarding damages. I said I wanted to talk about the due process. I did that. I want to talk about reasonable limits. I want to talk about informed consent and all that. How that talk about capacity is a ridiculous issue. It has nothing to do with vaccines. It's about bodily autonomy and informed consent. And then I said the last thing I wanted to mention, and I mentioned the class action that just got certified less than 2 weeks ago in Alberta. Huge, absolutely huge. This is going to be heard, and they're going to win. I have no doubt they're going to win. But something that came up was I noticed in the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act, which I didn't believe it when I heard about it, and then I had to read it in the act itself because I saw it in the summary, and I'm like, I don't believe it. They actually removed the ability to get damages, that is to get money from the government for violating your rights. And so it actually says here on page 8 out of 16 of the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act, it says enforcement of rights and freedoms. Anyone whose rights or freedoms is recognized and declared by this act have been infringed or denied, they apply to a court of competent jurisdiction to obtain such remedy. I'm just cutting something out here. Such remedies the court considers appropriate and just in the circumstances. This should be added. It should absolutely be added.
Was that page 8, Chris?
What was that?
Page 8, did you say?
Page 8 out of 16.
Yeah, and what section?
Enforcement of rights and freedoms, section 3.1. It says 7. The following is added after section 3. Enforcement of rights and freedoms. So I just read that, but I just took out subsection 2. This is the problem. Subsection 2 says an application under subsection 1 may not include or claim for damages in respect of an infringement or denial of rights and freedoms caused by an enactment of an act, including this act. So this couldn't be more critical because right now, and this is a good thing about the charter. I know Section 1 is really bad. It shouldn't be in there. But a good thing about the charter is under Section 24 sub 1, it says an appropriate and just remedy. And that's been, affirmed by the Supreme Court quite a few times over the last 24 years to include damages, to include money. And in the law, and this is so important, okay, it doesn't matter about, the property rights and all that. I'm not even talking about that. But when someone violates your rights under the law. So let's say you sue someone for breach of contract, right? That's remedied by money. You say sorry with money under the law. So if all of a sudden, if the government, which has this power imbalance between the state and the individual, they can crush you like a cockroach. You should be able to seek damages, money from the government. It's key to good governance. And the Supreme Court has recognized this in the charter jurisprudence regarding Section 24. So they've added this here. But when they added it, they put in the very next subsection right next to it, may not include an action for damages or for anything to do with damages. And then below that, that's page 8, and you don't even need to look at this. It talks about the Expropriation Act, and then it says, this section does not apply to relief sought under the Alberta Bill of Rights. So they're schizophrenic. The left hand and the right hand are doing completely different things. One is saying no damages, the other one is saying the Expropriation Act doesn't apply to this. So that just means about taking a property and all that sort of stuff. The point here is that damages should and must be in the Alberta Bill of Rights. It's not in there right now. It's a problem. This is in the Roth class action. It says, I have this here too. I have it. I forgot. I had it ready to go. It's in paragraph 18 of the certification decision. It says, breach of the Alberta Bill of Rights, like any other breach of statutory duty, is not a tort. It's not a wrong committed that's compensable with damages. It says here, but an action for breach of the Alberta Bill of Rights seeking declaratory relief is a cause of action in a sense contemplated by, there's a couple of Supreme Court cases, says this, in my view, meets the Class Proceedings Act requirement that the pleadings disclose a cause of action. And even if I'm wrong in pleading the Alberta Bill of Rights, Section 1A, that's the the enjoyment of property and due process clause has been breached. It is not a cause of action if he's wrong about that. It may be relevant to the pleading of negligence, which will be considered next. So the government here is looking ahead and saying it's only a matter of time that there will be an action or a class action brought seeking damages under the Bill of Rights, and maybe they'll get it. And so they want to take it out so that you can't possibly get a dime out of the government for violating your rights. So I wanted to mention that.
So is this, would you say that that's like some sort of a reaction to the Rath and Company business class action?
No, they did. They look, this is all part and parcel of everything that happened in COVID. They're like, there's only a matter of time until we're going to be sued. There's only a matter of time until something happens again, and they try it again. And how do we insulate the government against liability? How do we protect ourselves? How do we limit our liability? And they're like, oh, well, I know a good way. Let's put it right in the Bill of Rights. Let's pretend we're giving people their rights, and then at the same time remove the ability to seek even $1 of damages from the government. And that's just flat out wrong. That's horrible. I mean, even the charter, you get damages. In my opinion, you don't get enough damages. Well, this depends on what case you look at, but I'm thinking of one particular case and decided in 2020 in the Court of Appeal here. But the point is, you should be able to seek damages. That's the entire point about anything in the law. When you break the law, you say sorry with money. Think about all the laws that they say we broke by simply protesting, and we had to pay all sorts of fines, right? Well, why is it that the government doesn't have to pay any money for breaking the law? So it's fundamental. You can see, I mean, the government has all this money, and yes, does it hit the taxpayers, and should it hit people individually? Yes, and guess who just said that? The Supreme Court of Canada found that, and it was actually the Liberal part of the six judges in the Supreme Court, the Liberal Justin Trudeau appointed justices, said that the government should have to be like people in Parliament are individually liable for damages under the Charter. This is a massive decision. I know there's all this like blackpilling and all that, and it's all really bad. No, this is a really good decision. And also in the Supreme Court in the U.S., they struck down something called Chevron deference. You probably heard about this. The administrative state, the deep state. They struck it down after 4 decades. These are the most significant decisions in 100 years, especially in the U.S. So there are some good things happening, and ultimately it does come down to what's in the mind, what's in our minds individually, and then how many people talk to other people, our friends and family. It's a mind virus, right? Everything about collective rights, trumping individual rights, that's not Canada. That's not our values. Same thing in the United States, about the primacy of the individual. It's about the individual's rights. The state's rights are just to actually protect your individual rights, not to crush your rights in the hopes of protecting you, like Tony Soprano protects you and gets money for protecting you. It literally is a racket. It literally is, and that's why I mentioned the Public Health Agency of Canada is a terrorist organization. We can literally repeal the Public Health Agency of Canada Act and remove their authority. And that's the same thing. C-293 wants to give them more power. C-63 wants to, limit your ability to pre-crime. To say something in the future, you could go to jail. And then something you said 10 years ago can also put you in jail. And then there's the self-digital ID bill. That's S-210. They want to protect kids from internet porn. So let's give everyone a digital ID and leave that up to subordinate legislation so they can determine all that without a vote. And the last thing is S7 about search, anything goes, search and seizure bill. The Court of Appeal in Ontario said you can't do this stuff. This will override that. They just said that. The Court of Appeal in Ontario unanimously said you can't do this. You can't search people indiscriminately at the border. So yeah, so there's all that. And the last point I wanted to make is regarding protests and regarding how do you change society? Why does stuff change anyway? Look at what the trans agenda. How did that come about? How did the SOGI trans agenda come about? That's like 0.5% of the population. Those people kept on, shouting off the roof to do an equivalent, shouting off the rooftops and or shouting out, at street corners with bullhorns until the rest of society complied with their demands. And essentially, you don't need one of the greatest lies ever told. Is you need 50%. You need a majority.
Well,
you need a majority. You don't. And with
the trans agenda, I just want to interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
With the trans agenda, we have to realize that it's a lot more. George Soros backed that whole agenda, just like Black Lives Matter, just like Antifa. And the reason they did that, and just to put it in perspective, is the trans agenda. The trans people are being used, and the way they're being used. This is all about artificial intelligence and transhumanism. And as we realize what they're really doing and why they're doing it, and this isn't conspiracy, this is what they're doing. The trans is to open that door to a destruction of the nuclear family, so that the family and the gender neutral is just AI, artificial intelligence. It's a takeover, and it's part of the takeover when we understand the bigger picture of what they're doing. And with the chemtrails and all these things people don't want to talk about, because I ran in federal politics in a federal election on chemtrails and the GMOs and the MMR vaccine, in which
Brad,
the government.
I'm with you 100%, Brad, but I gotta stop.
I'll just finish.
Constrained and focused.
I just want to finish.
Yeah.
So this is all I wanted to say was about protesting. The government, doesn't matter what government, hates protest. It doesn't matter how big or small the protest is. They hate protest. And with the Tiananmen Square, the reason why the protest collapsed is one of the protest leaders left, and then the government crushed the entire protest. A lot of people don't know that. Protests are key, but it is important to have an overall strategy. And so you don't need a majority, but what you do need is, unfortunately, you do need to meet a certain percentage. And the percentage is, according to Nassim Taleb, who wrote a book called Skin in the Game in 2018. He's a mathematical modeler, and he wrote a book. And in that book is one chapter called The Dictatorship of the Minority. You should look this up. And he says you only need 3.5% to 4% of society to be intransigent, meaning will not give in, before the rest of society must cater to their demands. And guess what happened during the convoy? You had approximately 5% of the population of Canada go through Ottawa in a little over 3 weeks. And then guess what? Everything got struck. So you don't need 50%. You need about, I would say, at most 10%. 4 million people out of 41 million approximately in Canada would be enough to crush all of this by nightfall tomorrow. You don't need anything more than that. And I would say that as soon as you realize that, and the rest was mentioned, by Brad about this, but the overall plan. The plan is it's from Yuri Bezmenov to subvert democratic society with the Marxist-Leninist values. You can look up the 4 stages of ideological subversion. It's 7 minutes from an 80-minute interview done in 1984 with this guy called Yuri Bezmenov. The stages are demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. That's it. And when I heard Justin Trudeau talk about the new normal at the beginning of April of 2020, I'd seen the whole interview 10 times before COVID. So I knew well before that all of it was garbage. But the point is, there is an overall strategy. It is the fascists using a communist playbook. It is a collectivist strategy to subvert our society, to destroy it, to build back better. Anyway, I'm done. Thank you very much for hearing all that. But that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
All right, so we're putting it to a stop. That's why we're doing this show. Like I'm ready to put this to a stop. And so here's the thing. We're going to have a protest regarding Alberta Bill 24 here in Edmonton, and Mel Switzer and Alberta for Liberty and Sherry Strong and Brad Kerrigan and other folks are going to help put that together, and based on the expertise of a lot of people that are speaking out on this stuff. C293 at this point, we're looking at this campaign to basically contact your senators. I've posted the link. I'm just going to put this back up there again. It's in chat, and I'm going to paste it again. Okay, so we want everybody to send these senators an email. Okay, so protest Alberta Bill 24, send the senators an email. But now we've got this one other issue. And before I let the panel go, I'm going to give you all an option. If you need to run, then run. I'd like to go for at least another 20 minutes, okay? I'd like to open up this discussion on the treason file, maybe play just a few minutes of an expose that's being done by the Northern Perspective, and then, really talk about what Pierre Poilievre's statements are on this. And I think, really what this country needs to do en masse is pressure their conservative politicians to start doing the right thing. And the more that we do that publicly, it's going to become somewhat obvious, I think, that those people are not actually representing our interests. And once enough people see that, you've now got your, if it's 3.5%, whatever it is, to stand up and to ultimately stop this. Because, what we're looking at is the potential in 2025 of a bird flu pandemic or some sort of, livestock-based pandemic where they're going to want to shut down a protein source and give you a little jibby. And we're kind of over that. It should be the government that recommends best practices, but it's up to the individual to decide for themselves what's appropriate, right? And I think that's somehow being lost. So, Mel, on the protest front, how does November 18th sound? Are we penciling in the 18th for a massive Alberta rally at the Edmonton Legislature? Brad, what does that date sound like for you? And can you mobilize people to the Alberta Legislature on this Bill 24 issue?
Bill, I actually don't know if I can get out of work that day, but the Tuesday is better, so that you might. I can plan and I can organize. I just may not be physically present on the 18th.
Yeah, fair enough. But so there's a team of people there that, somebody's going to be able to pick up the torch. Okay, so that's taking action. I'll take a quick musical break and then play a few short clips and get the group's discussion on those clips, and then we'll wrap it up. So bear with me here as I tee up a little music, because I need to hit a bio break myself. I've got everything else lined up. Here we go.
Is the center of our gravity. Home is not a privilege that is granted by Her Majesty. A home is our right, a place to raise our family. Home is where we go for tranquility and sanctity. Home is where we feel at peace and we can have some privacy, where I can voice my thoughts and nobody tries to silence me. Home is where commotion turns to settling dust. Home is where we raise our kids to be better than us. And home is more than just a house. Home is where there's unity. Home is where we gather. Home is our communities. Home is the connection that we share when we trust. Home is not about me. Home is about us. Home is the guiding light within that we feel drawn to. Home is the source of our creation we belong to. Let them try with their lies meant to pull us apart. We always find our way home because we know it by heart.
All these long and lonely roads, they wind and bend to find me friends. They lead me home, and I know no matter where I roam, I'm watching love from high above.
countries. Home is the earth below, the sky above me. Home is the truth we instinctively know, helping us to find home everywhere that we go. But there's many false prophets trying to lead us astray, who want to tell us what to do but not hear what we say. They ignore us while they play their game of righteous pretend, like we don't notice that their rules ain't applying to them. While our children have lost their future, made to cover up their faces, forced to get injections for attendance at their favorite places. Where does it end? When we take to the streets, the government won't call a hearing, they just call the police. And to the faithless stormtroopers, where is your humanity? Just following orders is no excuse for your insanity. It's time to cut the rod out at the source like a cavity. It's time to go home and realize that we're a family.
All these long and lonely roads, they wind and bend, they find me friends, they lead me home. And I know no matter where I roam, I'm watching love from high above, I'm not alone.
This country, is this the way you like to live? Constantly harassed to put a mask upon your wife and kids. Cops with riot packs who like to act as if no rights exist. Alive, but we're not really living. What kind of life is this? The world is full of risks, but we don't need protection, cause all of their solutions are much worse than the infection. If we want resolution, we need unity, not politics. Why should we trust somebody who's broken so many promises? But maybe this was meant to be and had to happen all along. The cycle's always spinning and it's darkest right before the dawn. It's funny, to the point of laughing out loud, cause what they said would never happen, well it's happening now. And so many are waking up. Welcome to the front lines, the ones who know behind the clouds will always be the sunshine. You and I see through the lies, no longer alone, and let the compass in our souls guide and carry us home.
All these long and lonely roads, they wind and bend, they find me friends, they lead me home. And I know no matter watching love from high above, I'm not alone. All these long, lonely roads lead me home. I'm watching love from high above, I'm not alone. All these friends, they lead me home. And I know no matter where I roam, I'm watching love from high above, I'm not alone. Take me home.
Uh-huh.
In creating COVID-19 is flying under the radar. This should be sending shockwaves around the world. The Trudeau government was complicit in shipping deadly viruses to China's bioweapons labs, which may have cost millions of lives. That is worth repeating. Our government discovered that its top security laboratory was leaking lethal pathogens to a hostile foreign power, then made a deliberate decision to allow it to continue happening. A recent parliamentary report reveals that the National Microbiology Laboratory, or NML, in Winnipeg and China's Wuhan Institute of Virology were working hand in hand. Under the Trudeau government's watch, deadly viruses were reportedly transferred from the Wuhan lab even after CSIS raised alarms about ties to the Chinese military. Instead of shutting down the lab, suspending personnel, or alerting the RCMP, the Trudeau administration stayed passive, effectively greenlighting further collaboration with agents of a state known for bioweapons research. SARS-CoV-2 samples found in Wuhan bear genetic markers of viruses sent from Winnipeg, implicating Canada in China's gain-of-function research. For 3 years, the Trudeau government stonewalled Parliament and the RCMP, refusing to release crucial evidence about the events in Winnipeg. They even went so far as to sue Parliament to block the investigation, giving scientists involved ample time to return to China without facing questioning. These same scientists, now operating under new titles, continue their work in China, potentially advancing research that may have already led to a global catastrophe. To compound this, during the pandemic, the Trudeau government called a snap election, delaying the investigation further and allegedly providing political cover for Chinese interference in Canadian elections. If these allegations hold weight, Canada's reckless complacency may have contributed to a pandemic that claimed over 7 million lives, eroded civil liberties worldwide, and shattered the global economy. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's documented evidence of a government willing to risk global pandemics for political optics. Refusing to confront these facts only fuels further contempt for Canadian democracy, a betrayal that goes beyond mere incompetence and borders on treason. Well, everyone is focused on Trump winning the U.S. election.
Pretty relevant to the situation, doesn't it, folks? You know, Pierre Poilievre is likely the most. He's the one that should be naming the names. He's the one that should be taking responsibility for this particular issue. He's claimed,
"Oh well, I haven't read the report. I haven't read the report."
Well, that's a problem. We know this guy has parliamentary privilege. This is something that Dave Freedom has made a short video on. I just want to play that really quickly and then basically show what Pierre has said recently about the treason file, and for general awareness. And let's just see from our panel what their final thoughts are on pressuring Pierre Poilievre as maybe a method, public pressure, to put a stop to this entire thing. So here we go.
Tired of waking up knowing that your prime minister committed treason? Feeling hopeless, like everyone's in on it. So what's the point? You probably heard that the Conservative Party, also confirmed by the NDP, announced that Parliament was given proof of breach of national security, including the traitors' names and proof of Chinese election interference. We also know the Conservatives do in fact have the evidence of the national security breach with the Communist Party of China, as well as the names of the traitors. Well, now there's finally something you can do about it, with the Ultimate Public Awareness 2000. Many will claim that the Conservatives aren't legally allowed to release the names of the traitors. Well, you'll be happy to know that for the low price of free, you'll see clear proof that MPs do in fact have a constitutional duty and right to use parliamentary privilege. This means they can give us the names of the MPs who committed treason and arrest them, while being fully protected from being sued, fired, arrested, or punished in any way. Amazing! With parliamentary privilege, no MP will have to deal with those pesky gag orders, signed agreements, or even laws or court orders. Want to know the secret sauce in this case law? Glad you asked. On May 13, 2022, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice in Alford v. Canada found that Section 12 of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of the Parliamentaries Act unconstitutional because it violated parliamentary privilege. This confirms that every MP still has the constitutional duty and right to say whatever the public needs to know and arrest traitors. Now that the cat's out of the bag, let's pass on the word to as many as we can to create public outcry and make sure the Conservatives and RCMP have our consent to hold those traitors accountable to us. Will they do their jobs? Find out next time in part two.
We told him to release the names, and we know he'd release the names if he had them. This is a prime minister who releases information on foreign interference whenever it suits his political purposes. He names names when it serves his purposes. And so we said, we've got nothing to hide, so name the names, Mr. Trudeau. If you've got nothing to hide, then come out, tell us who they are, so that all Canadians can hold them to account. But he hasn't done that, because I think the reality is that it's the Liberals who are compromised. We know that Trudeau was aware that in 2 subsequent elections, Beijing interfered to help him win. He had that information on his desk. He did nothing with it. He knew he had MPs in his caucus that were compromised. He didn't do anything about that until he was caught. So we can't trust anything Justin Trudeau says on foreign interference or anything else. And frankly, this is a man who has a track record of lying.
You have to listen to this guy.
He lied when he said he didn't interfere and pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould on removing charges for SNC-Lavalin. He lied when he said the carbon tax.
Okay, we know he named the. Yeah, I hear you, Brad.
This guy's.
We okay. So let me close this off, and then Brad, you get your you'll get your say. So here we are. This guy is saying he's only naming the names when it's convenient. You know, and we know if he had the report, he'd name the names. Well, what the hell is that, Jody? What is he saying? He's giving himself an excuse. I don't have the report, therefore I can't name the names. So, Mr. Trudeau, name the names. Why won't he name the names? No, you've got parliamentary privilege, Pierre. He's not looking too good in this still frame, is he? Pierre, go get the report. Okay, the jig's up. We know you can name the names. There's no non-disclosure agreement that can be signed by this individual. Okay, go get the report. Name the names on the floor of Parliament, and let's play a game of political plinko, shall we? And find out whose names are on there. Marilyn.
I had heard that he would not sign the non-disclosure agreement, which is why he didn't get that document, but I haven't verified that.
Well, yeah, no, that's his excuse. But I just showed you a video that says no. According to Alford versus Canada, 2022, May 13th, 2022, Ontario Superior Court, that parliamentary privilege was upheld, and therefore he could, if he went and signed that NDA, it would be non-binding upon his parliamentary privilege, which means he could go on the floor of the House of Commons and name those names. Marilyn, final thoughts.
Well, I want to thank you, first of all, Phil, for putting this together. It's really appreciated. So if this is final thoughts, I came to the conclusion about 4 years ago that Alberta had to become its own nation. So I've lost confidence in the federal system. I did read the Migrant Compact agreement that Jason Kenney and Stephen Harper reviewed twice, and when it was circulating around the world and signed by Justin Trudeau as soon as he came into office, and we were not warned about that by the Conservative government. So when it comes to Mr. Poilievre, protecting the rights of Canadians, I don't have great confidence there.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much. Connie, what are your final thoughts on everything that we've covered up to and including this treason issue?
I think if people go and pull up, when C-293 was first introduced, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith said that there's nothing new in this bill. And that was a red flag for me, so I started digging, and there's nothing new in this bill. If you go to the Sustainable Development Act, 117 Conservatives voted yes. So I don't know which Conservative MPs we would possibly have that don't know about what's going on. And yet Pierre told Mark Friesen he hadn't read the Sustainable Development Goals. Or he hadn't read Agenda 2030. Yet they signed on in 2008 the Sustainable Development Act. And 117 Conservatives voted yes.
Mm-hmm.
There was one MP who said no, and that was a Saskatoon MP. I can't think of his name.
Okay, I want to hear from Brad. Brad, we're hoping you're going to. We're hoping that you're going to be able to take part in an Alberta-wide rally here in Edmonton. What are a few short thoughts that you have on the treason file?
Well, the treason file, I think, to really put in perspective, when I ran in federal politics against Ted Menzies, who was the assistant finance minister, we debated on global television. And I'll just give you a quick story what happened there. We debated it on global TV, and there was about an audience of about 400 to 500 people. And what happened was during the debate, I really was speaking from the heart because I knew the facts and financial and all these things. So I really and not ego, but I destroyed them. Everybody said, we did that. So a week later, we went for coffee and actually sat down and had a cup of coffee about, the debate that we had. And it was quite interesting because he sat there and he says, Brad, you're right. Because I was talking about the MMR vaccine. I was talking about GMO foods. I was talking about the chemtrails. I was talking about other things that nobody wanted to talk about in 2011. These were taboo. So what was happening is in that election, he said to me, he says, Brad, you're right. And I says, well, if you know I'm right, why don't you do something about it? And he looked at me and he says, Brad, I can't. He says, I'm a piece of the machine. I'm told what to say. I'm given my talking points, and I'm given a little bit of money for my riding each year. And he looked at me and he almost was crying because we were having a heart to talk. This is heart-to-heart talk. And this is an assistant finance minister, one of the top portfolios in Ottawa. And so he was saying he has no clue or no ability to stand up for the people. So when we talk about treason and we talk about our political system, it's so not representative of the people. It's set up that way. But we have to realize that's why we set up the party called the New Federation Party. And please check out the website to go to Ottawa and actually take back the rights. And this party, we've had the names a couple of times during COVID, but I didn't want to bring it on the stage during the rallies because I didn't want to divide people based on political affiliations. And I wanted the unity. And I thought that was the most important thing. But now when you see the corruption and no accountability for the vaccines, the treason that we're seeing everywhere and all aspects of everything.
So do you think a large public pressure campaign put on Pierre Poilievre to reveal these names, basically say, ha, we have you. We know you can name the names. So Pierre, it's time to name the names. Go ahead and do it, do your job. Do you think that might lead to us finding out about some of these other things that the public has questions on?
Well, it's the same type of idea. When we think Pierre's our savior, he's not. He's part of the globalist system. When you get into his background and his family's background and his wife's background. And when we realize he's not in a position to do anything. He's just like, it's like in the States when they wanted to do certain things, to protect Trump or whatever, they couldn't do it because they don't have the power. The deep state, European Union, it's the Crown Corporation, as most of us know, and we really have no power in this current state. So he can go in there and say, yeah, I want the names and play this political football back and forth, which is what he does, and he's good at it, but it's all a distraction. It's a distraction. We need to realize our political representation does not represent us. It can't. And that's just the reality.
Okay, so I'd like to open this up to Rick Walker and Jody and Chris. You guys have been listening intently this entire time, and I thank you for joining us. Can you kind of, between the three of you, kind of bring this to some sort of an end for our viewers? Like I'm suggesting that if we can nail Pierre to the wall through a public pressure campaign, what is obvious, and he has to name these names, that it's going to lead to some sort of a major government event. I'm envisioning, like a meteorite hitting Ottawa, and a number of those bodies are, represent, people that are going to go to prison over this stuff. Rick, start with you. Go ahead.
Could be effective. I think that with all of this, one of the keys to doing something constructive is focus. It's important to, if you're going to launch some sort of a campaign, set a goal, focus on a message, and try to get to the destination that you set, right? So if this demonstration coming up, for instance, later this month, is focused on the amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights, focus on that. And yeah, Phil, I think that holding Pierre's feet to the fire on the issue of naming the names, I think that could actually be effective if he actually does have access to the names. My position on this from the beginning, with the journalist who held the news conference, his name escapes me at the moment, about a week and a half ago. Does anybody remember his name?
Rodney Palmer?
No, he used to work at. Anyway, he had the news conference.
Scott. Yeah, right. Something Scott. Can't remember.
Yeah. In any event, I think that this has to be handled though in a very cautious way, because I've seen people. Because I think there's a trap that has already been set here by Trudeau and even the Liberals, where they're sort of enticing people, trying to reel them in and get people to name names in public, people who don't have parliamentary privilege. And I've seen one member of parliament already accused of committing acts of treason and other criminal acts by being involved in all of this, when it was also stated during the news conference that this member of parliament was only involved in an unwitting fashion, which means that this person may not have committed a crime at all. And Trudeau, I think, with that MP sitting right next to him in the House, is very confidently and I think smugly just proceeding with all of this. It seems to me like he's just waiting to launch lawsuits or to spring some sort of, there's something more going on. And we have to be mindful that Trudeau has all the information and we're all proceeding with very little actual information. And what some people are saying is actual proof of a crime being committed. A lot of what I heard during the news conference wasn't actual proof. The allegations, yes, and unnamed sources, that's not proof. So as much as I want the names named, we have to be mindful that our members of parliament, including Pierre, do have parliamentary privilege, and they can do that on the House floor without fear of being sued or being prosecuted for something or losing everything that we have. I can see some live streamers potentially, and I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying that there is a danger there that live streamers could end up being sued by members of parliament for defamation, slander, and substantial penalties being paid down the road. I think there's a potential trap there. Just a word of caution as we proceed and try to get to a constructive place with this and hold people who are responsible accountable.
Right. Rick, I hear what you're saying. I think that sounded like a big CYA to me, a cover your A. So Northern Perspective is doing a fairly significant and detailed discussion about the whole Winnipeg lab thing and the Wuhan lab thing. It's mostly focused on the scientists, but basically goes into the election interference and the fact that there are implications there. So, I mean, nobody in the pod sphere is, saying specifically. I mean, I think most people, okay, forget it. Let me just say it. I think Trudeau's a traitor. I'm on record with Integrated National Security Enforcement Team of saying that on June 9th, 2021. There's a whole video out there. If you haven't seen it, go see it. But
sure,
it directly related to this issue regarding these Chinese scientists in that lab and what I viewed as manipulation of the government with Chinese influence. And Bill Gates is involved, and there's this lipid nanoparticle that has questionable connections to a Vancouver University, that sort of thing. Is Trudeau involved with that? I don't know. There's people saying that on the other side of the border, but ultimately,
all I'm saying, Phil, is Jordan Peterson was accused by Trudeau while he was giving testimony under oath, he was accused by Trudeau of taking money from the Russians. And then Peterson is contemplating legal action against Trudeau for doing that. And it works both ways. So I think you have to be very careful, especially if you're just a private citizen with no parliamentary privilege, about naming names and adding to that accusations of some sort of criminal act without actual proof. You better be able to back up and prove anything that you actually say. That's my only word of caution.
No, certainly. But I mean, nobody's making this stuff up. This is coming from the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians.
Sure.
There's a report. I don't have the link handy, but there is a report, and I know it's being distributed in a few different social media circles. So this is for real, Rick. I mean,
yeah, but even so, even with an intelligence report, everybody's entitled to due process, and there's a legal game that plays out here, right? So I'm just be careful what you do. Make sure you get it right. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Jody and Chris, final thoughts. Take us out. What are your thoughts for the end of this broadcast?
Well, I don't know how many people remember this or not, but when petition E407, the one that Melissa Outwater penned and Michelle Ferrari supported it in the House with regards to calling for a vote to have a new election due to all of the transgressions that were happening in the House, that very same day as that petition was read in the House, there was a bill that received or had passed in the House. It received royal assent and was announced in the House that very day. That was a whistleblower bill that protected all MPs if they decided to come forward and be a whistleblower. I was sitting in the room as that was announced, and all those MPs stood up and they cheered and they clapped and they were so excited that they were now protected by legislation that allowed them to be whistleblower and set aside privilege in order to share what was actually going on behind the scenes. That was February 2024. So when they talk about, or someone had mentioned, Melanie, I believe it was mentioned, that it's kind of rumored that Pierre Poilievre didn't sign this non-disclosure agreement. That's why he can't name the names. Well, even if that's true, even if there was a non-disclosure agreement that people had to sign in order to see it, they are protected under that legislation that received royal assent back in February, protecting them under whistleblower status. So that's one. Number two, the fact that this report came out in June of 2024 and the House continued to do business, still to this day is doing business. I know they're on sort of a weird hiatus right at the moment because of redacted documents that need to be released to the RCMP. But the fact that that report came out, it was reported on. At that moment in time, Pierre Poilievre, and I'm going to put it on his shoulders because he is the opposition, the leader of the opposition party right now. On that very day that that report became public and was read in the House, right then and there, he should have stood up and made a motion to stop all business happening in the House. The fact that he did not, being the opposition leader, or that anybody else sitting there, any other MP sitting there, did not rise and call for a motion to immediately halt all business in the House makes every single one of them traitors against the Canadian people. Mm-hmm. They received a report that clearly stated treason was happening, that there was traitors in the House, and yet business has continued as usual. Bills have been brought to the floor. Bills have been voted on the floor. Bills have made royal assent on the floor, all knowing we've got traitors working within our House. None of that should have been allowed to happen. And the fact that MPs allowed it to continue means every single one of them are traitors. Because it is their job to protect the Canadian people. They were put in those seats to look after infrastructure and to govern and to make sure that Canadian people were at the forefront of every single thing that they did. And the fact that they sat there, continuing business, continuing voting, continuing listening to bills come to the floor, and not telling us, one, who the people are, who their traitors are, two, allowing those traitors to vote. We don't know what their intentions are when they brought bills to the floor. We don't know what their intentions are when they voted on legislation, when legislation went all the way through and received royal assent. We don't know what their intentions are or who those people were being loyal to. Were they being loyal to the Canadian people, or were they being loyal to a foreign entity? So the moment that report became public, every single one of those MPs that continued doing business, continued in committee meetings, continued passing legislation, every single one of them, as far as I'm concerned, is a traitor to the Canadian people. End of story.
Yeah, what she
wow.
said.
Yeah. I loved it. And I think on that note, we are out.
There is out there a deliberate undermining of mainstream media. Mais aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Ils sont extrémistes.
Qui ne croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. C'est un...
You deserve better. You deserve a government that's going to continue to say, get vaccinated. Don't think you can get on a plane or a train beside vaccinated people and put them at risk.
A number of people have testified in this inquiry referencing your widely published comments and calling the unvaccinated racist and misogynist. And we have heard testimony in this inquiry about how some of your officials wanted to label protesters as terrorists.
Un petit groupe, mais qui prend de la place. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces gens-là?
Would you agree with me that one of the most important roles of a prime minister is to unite Canadians and not divide them by engaging in name-calling?
I did not call people who were unvaccinated names. The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts, the way CBC and CTV, when they were our only sources of news, used to project across the country, at least a common understanding.
I think most people would be shocked to find out that when you have the Prime Minister of Canada getting up in front of a camera in the spring of 2020,
this will be the new normal until a vaccine is developed,
telling the world that the only way forward is to allegedly return to a new normal when there is a vaccine. What Trudeau did not tell the public was that he had a financial stake in the outcome of that being the selected pathway forward. Two companies were formed, Arbutus Pharmaceuticals and Hiatus Pharmaceuticals.
What interest do you have in Arbutus Pharmaceutical, Mr. Trudeau?
Thank you for coming out.
I wonder if they ask about Hiatus Pharmaceutical. What is Trudeau's stake in Hiatus Pharmaceutical? We all want to know. There's people dying suddenly in this country.
There was something else, another article about Bill Gates that came out today that said he's just been indicted. He's been indicted in the Netherlands for lying to the public about the COVID vaccine. And he's going to have to go to trial. You think that he wants to go to trial here in the United States of America? You think maybe that's one of the reasons he chose to give $50 million to Kamala Harris?
In the future, will I need my mind, or will Google take over this grind? I'm so tired of using my head, just wanna be wired directly into this grid. I wanna get fucked up and then hit undo, get my head hooked up to download some kung fu. I wanna be free of all responsibility. I want a TV right on my retina, please. And if it looks like it's about to go down, I don't think twice, it's alright. And if it looks like I'm about to hit the ground, I know that I won't pay the price. I don't care if trouble feels like coming around, 'cause I got autocorrect for life. Span in the future, think we'll still do it by hand. What is happening to the length of my thought? What is that crackling? I think my brain's about to short. I wanna get fucked up and then hit undo, get my head hooked up to download some kung fu. I wanna be free of all responsibility. I want a TV right on my retina, please. And if it looks like shit's about to go down, I don't think twice, it's alright. And if it looks like I'm about to hit the ground, I know that I won't pay the price. I don't care the trouble feels like coming around, 'cause I got autocorrect for life. Autocorrect for life. I wanna get fucked up, get my head hooked up. I wanna be free, I want a TV. And if it looks like shit's about to go down, I don't think twice, it's alright. And if it looks like I'm about to hit the ground, I know that I won't pay the price. I don't care the trouble feels like coming around, 'cause I got autocorrect for life. Autocorrect for life.